Hello everyone, I'm the Dream Teller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I arrived at the old roadside inn early in the morning. The owner had given me the keys a week before along with a set of instructions. He wanted me to renovate the place. I had never stayed overnight at a job site before, but he insisted that I finish the work in a short amount of time. He said the inn had been abandoned for years and that it needed to be ready for new guests by the end of the month. He paid me well, so I said yes. When I pulled off the highway and saw the building, I noticed missing shingles, cracked windows, and a faded sign. Nothing seemed unusual at first. It was a large wooden structure with 2 floors, maybe 10 rooms total. There were no cars, no people, just the empty parking lot and a dead tree nearby. The sky was pale and the wind was quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The lobby smelled like mold and old furniture. A reception desk stood against the far wall. Its surface had stains and scratches. There were wooden chairs along the sides and a dusty old couch near the entrance. The whole place felt stale. I touched the banister of the staircase leading to the second floor. The wood felt damp. The air was stuffy, and I decided to open a few windows. Before I carried in my bags, I walked around the ground floor to see what needed to be done. The walls had old wallpaper peeling off. The floors creaked. Some doors were off their hinges. The dining area still had old tables and chairs covered with sheets. I made notes in my small notebook. Sand and refinish floors, strip wallpaper, paint walls, fix windows, replace light fixtures, remove old furniture. After bringing my bags and tools inside, I picked a room on the ground floor to use as my bedroom. It was small and had a narrow bed frame without a mattress. I unrolled my sleeping bag and placed it on top. I left my flashlight, phone charger, bottled water, and a sandwich there. I didn't plan to waste time driving back to town every day. It was a 2-hour round trip, and I just wanted to finish faster. I had enough supplies for a couple of weeks. I started working that afternoon. I peeled wallpaper in the lobby and tried to see if the beams were still solid. I worked quietly, only stopping for water. Late in the evening, I took a break and sat outside on the old porch. The sky was getting dark. No cars passed by. The wind picked up a bit, and I heard branches rubbing against the side of the building. I went back in and climbed the stairs, checking each room. Most were identical: a single bed frame, an empty closet, a small table, and a chair. Nothing strange, just old and neglected. I walked through the hallway slowly, shining my flashlight in corners where the dim ceiling lights didn't reach. As I headed back downstairs, I thought I heard something. It sounded like soft footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around. There was no one there. I stood still for a moment. I could hear my own breathing. Nothing else. Probably an echo or my imagination. I went to my room, ate half my sandwich, and rolled out my sleeping bag. I turned off the flashlight and lay down. The building was quiet. I could hear the wind outside. I closed my eyes, but my mind stayed alert. After about an hour, I drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up. There was a creaking sound outside my door. I opened my eyes and held my breath. I listened. The sound came in short intervals, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. I reached for my flashlight and pointed it at the door. The light showed the bare wooden surface. The sound stopped. My heart was beating fast. I waited a minute, then another. Eventually, I heard nothing else. I told myself it was probably the building settling. Old wood can make weird noises. I turned off the flashlight and forced myself to sleep again. In the morning, I got up and noticed that my toolbox wasn't where I had left it. I had placed it on the floor next to the bed. Now it was near the door. I blinked a few times and tried to remember if I had moved it. I was sure I hadn't touched it. Everything else seemed in order. Maybe I kicked it in my sleep. I decided not to dwell on it. I spent the day stripping wallpaper in the upstairs rooms. In the second room, I saw something odd. The sheets that had covered the furniture were folded neatly in the corner. I remembered leaving them on the chairs. I tried to recall if I had folded them myself. I didn't think so. I like to keep things organized, but I hadn't bothered to fold old dusty sheets. It didn't make sense. I checked the windows. They were closed from the inside. No footprints. No sign of anyone else inside the building. By midday, I felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I took a short break, went outside, and walked around the perimeter of the inn. The back of the building had a small yard with tall grass. I saw no tracks, no broken branches, nothing. The doors were all locked. I went back inside and continued my work. Around late afternoon, I started hearing faint sounds again. Footsteps, but always when I turned my back. When I stopped and listened, they stopped. Once I heard a door hinge squeak on the second floor. I rushed up there with my flashlight and found every door closed. The silence felt heavy. My heart rate went up again. I felt sweat on my neck and under my arms. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My own voice sounded weak. Nothing answered. That evening, I ate a quick meal of canned soup and bread. I sat in the lobby with my flashlight. I listened to the building. I heard the wind outside, a distant creak, and my own breathing. I tried to relax. I told myself to focus on finishing the job. I went to my room and set my alarm for early morning. I needed to paint the lobby walls and fix some floorboards. During the night, I woke up again. This time it was different. I heard a voice. It was a low, raspy voice, whispering something. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it around the small room. Empty. I opened the door and looked into the hallway. Nothing. But I could still hear the voice somewhere nearby. It was saying a name, over and over. It sounded like Robert or Roberts. I didn't know anyone with that name. It wasn't my name. My name is Daniel, and I had never met a Robert related to this job. I stepped into the hallway in my socks. The floor felt cold. I followed the sound to the stairwell, shining my light on the steps. No one was there. The voice stopped. I felt my stomach tense. I stood there for a few minutes, feeling the hair on my arms stand up. I went back to bed and stayed awake, staring at the ceiling until my alarm rang. The next morning, I noticed something disturbing. The furniture in one of the rooms I had cleared out was back in place, but arranged differently. I had dragged a table and a chair against the far wall the day before. Now they were centered in the room. The table faced the door. The chair stood behind it. The sheets were gone. I checked the closet, the hallway, every corner. The sheets were folded and placed behind the reception desk downstairs. I had never put them there. I felt my mouth go dry. Someone was messing with me. I decided to be systematic. I locked the front door and the back door with my own padlocks. I checked all the windows and made sure they couldn't be opened from the outside. I placed a ladder against one window in the back to see if anyone tried to climb in. I blocked the stairwell door to the attic, which I had never opened anyway. I kept my phone in my pocket and checked for service. I had one bar, not enough for a call. The closest town was a drive away. I would have to handle this myself. I worked all day with my ears open, my eyes scanning every room. I kept my toolbox in sight at all times. I heard soft steps behind me at least 3 times. Each time I spun around, shining my flashlight. Nothing. No dust disturbed, no footprints, no shadow. Yet I could feel something. A slight shift in the air, a dull pressure in my chest. My breathing got shallow. My throat felt tight. My hands trembled a bit when I tried to hammer nails into the floorboards. I forced myself to keep working. I wasn't going to run away because of some strange noises. That night, I decided not to sleep in the room I had chosen. I picked a different room upstairs, one with a view of the parking lot. I pushed a heavy dresser against the door. I turned on a small battery-powered lantern and sat on the bed frame facing the door. Around midnight, I heard the voice again. It said, "Roberts," in that same rough tone. This time it sounded closer, maybe just outside the door. I held my breath and listened. The voice said it again, then paused, then said it again. I felt sweat trickle down my face. My heart was pounding. I was wide awake. I moved the dresser aside and opened the door fast, shining my lantern into the hallway. It was empty. No one there. I checked the other rooms. All empty. The voice had stopped. I went back to my room and locked myself inside again. I waited, listening to every sound. The dresser felt heavy when I pushed it back in front of the door. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found new changes downstairs. The reception desk's drawers were all open. The ledger, which I had never touched, lay open on the floor. I picked it up. The pages were yellowed and had names written in faded ink. I ran my finger down the list of names, looking for Roberts. I saw a few names that started with R, but nothing that said Roberts. The last date in the ledger was 15 years old. I closed it and placed it back in the drawer. I checked the dining area. Some chairs had moved again, arranged in a circle. There were no footprints, no scuff marks. Everything was just shifted quietly during the night. My hands shook. I couldn't explain it. I tried to focus on the renovation again, but my mind wandered. I felt like someone stood right behind me, looking over my shoulder as I measured boards and cut wood. My back tingled. I kept glancing around. I grew tired and clumsy. I dropped my tools more than once. By the afternoon, I decided I had to wrap up the essential work and leave early. I couldn't take another night of this. My throat felt dry and my stomach turned at every small noise. I pushed through the last tasks. I painted the lobby walls, replaced some broken tiles, and installed new light fixtures. I worked without breaks. Around dusk, I climbed the stairs one last time to check the rooms. Everything looked fine at first glance. As I passed the third room on the left, I heard a step behind me. I froze. The hallway felt colder. I turned around. Nothing. But I could sense it. My hair stood on end. My skin felt tight. I stepped backward down the hall without turning my back on that spot. When I reached the stairs, I ran down, 2 steps at a time. I decided not to sleep there again. I threw my tools and clothes in my bag. I cleaned up my mess in the lobby. I locked the inn's door. The owner had paid in advance. I had done most of what he asked. The rest could wait. I just wanted to get out. As I carried my bag to the car, I kept glancing over my shoulder at the windows. The rooms looked dark. I didn't see anyone watching me, but I felt it. The same tightness in my chest lingered. I opened my car door and got inside. The engine started on the first try. I turned on the headlights and looked at the building one more time. The wind rattled a loose shutter. I didn't hear footsteps now. I didn't hear the voice. But the memory of those whispers still made my neck tense. I drove onto the highway and forced myself not to think too much. I kept my eyes on the road until I reached the next town. I never went back there. I never told the owner what happened. He sent me a message a week later, asking when I would finish the final details. I lied and said I had an emergency. He never responded after that. I don't know if he hired someone else. I don't care. I just know that I heard that voice call a stranger's name in that empty inn. I heard those footsteps follow me in corridors where no one stood. I saw furniture move around by itself. That was enough. I don't need an explanation. I don't want one. I just want to forget that place. On the first night, I stood in the dark living room and looked through the window. I saw a figure standing on the far side of the dry lake. I thought it might be a trick of the light or a tree stump. I moved closer to the glass and squinted. It stood upright, like a person, but it had no face. It did not move. It just pointed at me. I remember feeling something heavy in my chest. I backed away and told myself I was tired. It was my first night in the new house. I had no reason to panic, but I could not ignore that strange shape. I decided to keep the lights off and watch for a few more minutes. The figure did not move. I did not sleep well that night. I moved into this small one-story house near an old lake bed. The place was cheap, The realtor told me the lake had dried up years ago. The soil was damp in some parts, but mostly the area was flat, cracked mud. There were some trees around, but nothing thick or tall. The house stood close to the shore, separated by about 50 yards of old mud and dried debris. I picked this place because I wanted to be alone. I had grown tired of the city noise. I wanted quiet. I got it, but not in the way I expected. On the second night, I looked out again. The figure was there, same spot, still pointing at me, no face. I opened the door quietly and stepped outside, keeping the exterior light off. I listened. I heard insects. I heard a breeze. I heard distant rustling in the brush. I did not hear anyone moving across that muddy ground. I walked around to the side of the house and looked at the lake bed with a small flashlight. I aimed the beam carefully, trying not to blind myself. The figure was barely visible now, just a dark silhouette. I waited. It never shifted. I raised my voice and asked who was there. No response. I felt a tightness in my neck. The hair on my arm stood up. I went back inside and locked the door. In the morning, I walked out to the spot where I thought the figure had stood. The mud was solid in some areas and soft in others. I saw my own footprints. I saw cracked surfaces. I did not see footprints that belonged to anyone else. There were no boot prints, no shoe marks, no signs that a person had stood there. I checked a wide radius. Nothing. I tried to stay calm. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was a bush or a stump. I found no stump. There was nothing that could have created that shape. On the third night, I stood at the window again. The figure was there again, exactly the same position. It pointed at me with its right arm. I still could not make out a face. It was just a dark shape, like a person wearing dark clothes, but there were no details, no features, no highlights. I tried to open the window and call out. The window made a slight creaking noise. I said, "Hey." No response. I yelled, "Who are you?" The figure remained still. I felt sweat on my forehead. I closed the window and locked it. The phone had no service here. I had meant to fix that, but I had just moved in and had not gotten around to it. I had some old cell signal boosters in a box. I decided I would set them up in the morning. I went to bed that night trying to ignore the feeling that someone was outside watching me. I tried to sleep, but my ears kept picking up small noises. Creaks in the house. A tapping somewhere behind the wall. A gust of wind against the glass. Then I heard a whisper. It sounded like my name. It came from outside the bedroom window, or maybe the living room. It was a soft sound, like someone saying my name through the glass. I shot up in bed, breathing hard. I turned on the bedside lamp. The whispering stopped. I listened, holding my breath. Nothing. I got up and went to the living room. I turned on a lamp near the couch and peered out the window. The figure was there, still pointing, but now it seemed closer. Maybe it had moved 20 yards forward. It no longer stood at the far edge of the lake bed. It was closer to my side. I felt my stomach drop. I locked all the doors. I closed all the curtains. I lay awake until dawn, listening for that whisper. I thought I heard it once more, but I told myself it was the wind. In the morning, I checked the ground again. Still no footprints except mine. I looked carefully for any sign of disturbed soil. Nothing. The top layer of mud near my house was cracked but not broken by fresh steps. I tried not to panic. I told myself I had seen something that was not real, but I remembered the whisper. I remembered the shape. I remembered the way it pointed right at me. I spent most of that day unpacking and trying to get my cell phone booster to work. The signal here was weak. I managed to get a single bar after fiddling with the device on the roof. I tried calling a friend in the city, but the call dropped after a few seconds. I sent a text, but it did not go through. I told myself I would try again later. I ate a quick meal of canned soup and crackers. I kept looking at the front door, expecting to see it rattle or open, but nothing happened during the day. Before sunset, I stood outside with my flashlight and inspected the area around the house. I walked the perimeter. I checked for footprints for any evidence of a person hiding. I found nothing. I felt the air get cooler as the sun dipped low. I felt a pressure in my chest as I imagined that figure appearing again. I told myself I would handle it calmly. I would try to ignore it. I would treat it like a weird hallucination. Maybe I was stressed. That night I closed the curtains early and decided not to look outside. I turned on the TV and watched old DVDs because there was no cable. The volume was low and I tried to focus on the show. After a couple of hours I got up for a glass of water. I walked into the kitchen and glanced at the window over the sink. I froze. The figure stood there on my side of the lake bed now. Closer, maybe 10 yards from my porch steps. It pointed at me. I felt my hands shaking. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark. I looked again. It was still there. I could see it because of the moonlight. I could not see a face. It was like a human shape cut out of darkness. I whispered, "Go away." My mouth felt dry. I waited. The figure did not move. I heard something outside, a scraping sound near the porch. I stepped away from the window and bumped into a chair. I felt a bead of sweat rolling down my spine. I moved slowly to the living room and looked out the front window. The figure was still near the porch. It had not come closer, but it was close enough that I could make out its arm raised toward me. I locked the windows. I checked the back door. Locked. I picked up a heavy wrench from my toolbox in the hall. I waited. The TV was still on in the other room, but I did not move to turn it off. I stood there gripping the wrench, listening to the silence. After a long time, I heard a whisper again. It said my name. I heard it clearly this time, as if someone stood right outside the wall and spoke through it. I felt my heart racing. My legs felt weak. I wanted to shout back, but I could not form words. I ended up sitting on the couch with all the lights off, holding the wrench, breathing quietly. I listened for any sound of movement, but I heard only the occasional whisper of my name. After several hours, the sky started to lighten. I got up and looked out the window. The figure was gone. There was only the empty lake bed. My porch was still intact, no footprints, nothing. I could not understand how something could stand there and leave no trace. I spent the next day driving into town. It took about 40 minutes on a dirt road. I stopped at a small convenience store and tried to ask the clerk if anyone ever came out by the old lake bed. He looked at me with confusion. He said not many people go out that way. I asked if there had been any kind of strange sightings. He shrugged. I asked if there was a police station nearby. He said the nearest one was a few towns over. I tried making a phone call from my cell phone outside the store. The signal was weak. I managed to reach a friend's voicemail. I said I was having weird problems at my new place. I asked him to call me back. I did not go into detail because I felt embarrassed. I felt like he would laugh at me. I returned home in the late afternoon. As I approached the house, I felt a growing sense of dread. I checked around the property again before sunset. Nothing unusual. I went inside and decided to keep all the lights on this time. I ate a simple meal of bread and cheese. I tried to watch a DVD, but my stomach was turning. I sat near the front door with my flashlight and wrench, waiting. When it got dark, I looked out again. The figure was back, standing about where it had been the previous night. It pointed at me through the window. I felt my throat tighten. I pushed the sofa against the door and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I dragged a dresser from the bedroom and blocked the back door as well. Then I stood by the window and said, "What do you want?" I raised my voice. I tried to sound angry. No response. I shouted again, "What do you want?" The figure did not move. It just pointed. I hit the window with my fist. It made a dull thump. No reaction outside. I opened the window a crack and yelled, "Go away!" Then I slammed it shut. The whisper came soon after. It said my name in a voice that was quiet but clear. It came from behind the glass, right where I stood. I jumped back and nearly dropped the wrench. There was no one there, just empty air on my side and that figure outside. I paced the living room, holding the wrench. breathing through my mouth because my nose felt stuffed up. My body was stiff. My shoulders hurt from tension. I looked at the figure again. It seemed closer to the house now, maybe just a step or two. I had not seen it move. It was just somehow closer. I thought about calling the police, but I had no signal in the house. I tried anyway. No luck. I wanted to run outside and confront it, but my legs felt weak. I stayed inside. The whispering continued on and off through the night. Sometimes I would hear it at the front window. Sometimes near the back door. Sometimes near the bedroom window. Always my name, just once. Then silence. Each time I heard it, I froze, my heart pounding, my skin cold. I could not see any shadow through the curtains. I tried not to imagine a face. There was no face, just a shape. When dawn approached, I looked outside again. The figure was gone. I left the house and walked around the area. No footprints, no sign of anything. I tried to stay calm. I decided I needed help. I packed a bag and drove back toward the town. On the way, my car's engine light flickered, and I felt the car losing power. I managed to get it to a small mechanic's shop near the convenience store. The mechanic said he would need a day to fix it. He didn't have the parts. I asked if there was a place to stay overnight. There was a small motel, nothing fancy. I considered staying there, but I had all my stuff at the lake house, and I felt like I should not leave it unguarded. I ended up taking a taxi back, which cost me too much money. The taxi driver dropped me off at the start of the dirt road. He didn't want to go further. He said the road was too rough. I walked the rest of the way, feeling uneasy as the sun got lower. That night I took a different approach. I turned off all the lights and sat in the kitchen with a flashlight aimed at the door. I wanted to catch this thing in the act. I waited in silence. After a few hours, I checked the window. The figure was standing at the base of my porch steps. It pointed at me through the glass. It was so close now that I could see the edges of its shape, but still no face, no details. I held the flashlight on it. The beam lit nothing. It was as if the light did not reflect off it. I went outside. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping onto the porch with the flashlight and wrench. There was nothing there, just the muddy ground and the dry lake bed. I stepped down and shined the flashlight around. Nothing. I turned back to look at the window. I saw it inside my house now, standing near the couch. It pointed at me through the glass. I screamed. I ran back inside. The figure was gone. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat there until morning. I heard whispers at the door. It said my name softly a few times. I lay on the bed, holding the wrench, shaking. My throat was dry. My eyes were heavy, but I could not sleep. When sunlight came, I opened the bedroom door. The house was empty. No damage. Nothing out of place. That morning, I packed what I could carry and left on foot. I did not care about the rest of my things. I just wanted to get away. I walked along the dirt road until I reached the main road. I had no plan. I just kept walking. I did not want to see that figure again. I did not want to hear my name whispered from behind the glass. I did not return. I remember the evening I got the envelope because I was just finishing dinner. I had locked my apartment door and turned off the TV. I noticed something in my mailbox, and at first, I thought it was a bill or a piece of junk mail. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. It was a hand-drawn map of an old house. There was no address, only a small red circle around a spot in a neighborhood where I knew there was nothing now but an empty lot. Someone had left it for me without a note. No return address, no explanation. I studied it under the kitchen light, squinting at the uneven lines and the detail of the inside layout. It was detailed enough to show rooms and corridors. I recognized the rough outline of a property that, as far as I knew, had burned down decades ago. I had researched paranormal cases for years, so I had heard rumors of a house that sometimes appeared on full moons. But I never believed them. I considered ignoring the map. I didn't want to waste time chasing stories I already doubted, but the next night was a full moon, and I decided to go. The lot was 2 miles from my apartment. Around midnight, I parked my car on the street, walked over to the chain-link fence, and stood there holding a flashlight. The ground was bare. I saw broken glass, an old pipe sticking out of the dirt, and chunks of concrete. The moon was bright enough to see the whole area clearly. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just empty space and the shadows of a few trees behind the lot. Then, as I scanned the area with the flashlight off, I saw a faint outline. It was like a shadow of a structure that wasn't there. I stepped closer. The outline seemed to grow darker when I looked at it without direct light. When I moved around, I could see it was shaped like a 2-story house. The roof line, the porch, even what looked like a small chimney. But there was nothing physical there. It looked like a dark, flat shape against the night sky, a silhouette hanging in the empty space. My heart was beating fast. I felt sweat under my arms. I tried to touch it, sticking my hand forward into nothing. The air felt normal. I walked around the silhouette. From some angles, it vanished. From others, it came back into view. I decided to step right where the front door should be. I took a breath and moved forward. For a moment, I felt like I was passing through a curtain of cold air. My eyes adjusted. I could see a dim hallway in front of me. It was as if I had stepped into a building. The outside lot vanished from sight, and I stood inside a hallway with wooden floors, pale wallpaper, and a series of doors on both sides. I flipped my flashlight on. The beam lit up a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch much farther than the outline I had seen outside. It didn't make sense. The hall looked endless, fading into darkness far ahead. I listened. I could hear quiet laughter, but I didn't see anyone. The laughter was low, distant, and sometimes it shifted into what sounded like whispers. I called out, "Hello?" but got no answer. My voice echoed. The echo sounded off, like the space inside wasn't stable. I could feel my pulse in my neck. My mouth was dry. I decided to take a few steps forward. I passed several doors on my left and right. All were closed. Their surfaces looked old and worn. The doorknobs were simple and made of a dull metal. I reached for one doorknob. It was cold to the touch. I opened it, hoping to find a normal room. Instead, behind the door, I saw another corridor, angled differently, with a different floor pattern. I backed away and shut it. That didn't make sense. A door inside a house should lead to a room, not another corridor. I tried a door on the opposite side. Same thing. Another corridor stretched out, different lighting, maybe a slight tilt in the floor. I listened for the laughter again. It was still there. Faint. I could also hear shuffling, like shoes on wood, but I never saw anyone. My stomach felt tense. I tried the next door, and again it showed me another hallway that didn't align with anything I knew about normal architecture. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a person or something standing behind me, but it was always empty. I smelled dust. The air felt cool. I decided to mark my path. I took out a pen from my jacket pocket and drew a small X on the hallway's wallpaper where I had entered. I tried to keep track of the doors I opened, but after opening a few and stepping through them, I noticed something disturbing. The corridor behind me sometimes changed. I would look back and see fewer doors or different wallpaper patterns. Once I turned around and saw the corridor slant downward slightly like a ramp. Another time, I looked back and the X I had drawn was gone. I tried to remain calm. I told myself I had to keep a clear head. I slowed my breathing and tried not to panic. The floors creaked under my shoes. The laughter came and went, never right next to me, always somewhere far ahead. I tried walking straight ahead for a while without opening any doors. The corridor just kept going. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes, I turned around, expecting to see the entrance behind me, but all I saw was more corridor. The sense of direction was gone. I couldn't tell how far I had come. I kept my flashlight steady. I wanted to find a wall or something that would show me an exit. Instead, I found a door slightly ajar on my right. I could see a sliver of darkness inside. I pushed it open carefully. This time, instead of another corridor, I saw a smaller room with bare floorboards. As I stepped in, I noticed that the laughter seemed clearer here, but still I saw no one. I aimed the flashlight around. The room was empty except for a wooden chair in a corner. The chair looked old and had paint chipping off. I approached it and touched it. It felt solid. That meant at least some objects here were real. I checked the walls. No windows, no vents, no lights. I spoke again. "Is anyone here?" No reply, just a soft scraping sound. I felt a chill and turned around. There was no one. I backed out of the room and stepped into the corridor again. This time the corridor looked different. The wallpaper had changed from a pale pattern to a darker brown. The floorboards were narrower. I felt my chest tightening. I tried to remember the way I came in, but I couldn't find any sign of it. I tried running back, choosing random doors. Every door led to another corridor. Sometimes I found a dead end. Sometimes I found a hallway that twisted slightly. I never found the outside or anything familiar. At some point, I sat down on the floor and tried to calm myself. My legs were shaking. I was thirsty. The flashlight beam shook as my hand trembled. I took a deep breath and decided to pick a direction and stick to it. I walked slowly, touching the walls, feeling the texture of the wallpaper and the occasional wooden panel. I tried to keep track of every detail, but after a few minutes the details changed again. Different style of door frames, different patterns on the floor. The place didn't follow any normal logic. I heard a short burst of laughter behind a door to my left. I opened it, shining the light inside. It revealed another corridor, but this one had a slight curve to it. I followed it, hoping maybe it would lead me somewhere else. The wood creaked. I smelled something musty like old fabric. I listened carefully, but the laughter faded again. I heard what sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out words. I felt sweat running down my back. My throat was dry. I wanted to find a way out. I tried every door I passed. Most of them led to corridors. Some led to empty rooms. One room had a broken mirror on the floor. Another had a small shelf with nothing on it. Another had a rug rolled up against a wall. I touched these objects to make sure they were real. They felt solid, but useless. None of them helped me escape. I considered that maybe I was hallucinating, but I felt too alert. I was certain I had stepped into something that shouldn't exist. I tried to think logically. If the house had once stood here, maybe I was inside some strange remnant of it. But I didn't want to waste time on speculation. I needed an exit. I decided to leave marks. I tore strips from my shirt. I had a cotton undershirt beneath my jacket, so I pulled off small pieces and tied them to doorknobs. I left a trail of these fabric pieces behind me so I could see if the place rearranged itself. After walking a while and returning to check the marks, I found them gone. The doorknobs I had marked were different. The pieces of fabric had vanished. This made me panic. I started breathing fast and had to pause to slow down again. I whispered to myself, "Calm down." I tapped the floorboards with my foot, trying to see if there was any hollow space. They all sounded the same, just solid wood. I opened another door and found a corridor with a slightly lower ceiling. I followed it. I turned left at the next intersection, then right at another. I kept going. I no longer knew if I was heading deeper inside or back towards the entrance. I heard a distant scraping sound again, followed by a faint giggle. I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. My voice sounded small in that place. I tried to listen for my echo, but it came back strangely distorted. I could feel my heart pounding. My legs felt tense. My arm holding the flashlight was getting tired. I tried resting once more, leaning against a wall and focusing on my breathing. I got up and kept moving. Eventually, I noticed something different. The corridor ahead seemed lighter, as if there was a faint glow. I walked towards it, feeling cautious and a bit hopeful. As I moved closer, I realized it was the same corridor I had first entered. I recognized the wallpaper pattern from my first few minutes inside. I rushed forward, scanning the area for any sign of the entrance. I found the spot where I thought I had first come in. I stepped forward, shining the flashlight ahead. For a moment, I saw darkness and the faint outline of the empty lot outside. I reached out and felt cold air. I moved slowly, and after a few steps, I was outside again. I stood on the bare ground of the vacant lot. When I turned around, I saw nothing but empty space. The silhouette of the house was gone. I aimed my flashlight around. The lot was just a vacant patch of dirt and debris. No sound, no corridors. I was sweating. My shirt stuck to my skin. I swallowed and tried to calm myself. I could still feel my heart beating hard. I backed away from the spot and walked towards my car. I looked over my shoulder several times. The empty lot stayed empty. The moon was still bright. I checked the time on my phone. Only about an hour had passed since I arrived. It felt longer inside that place. I stood next to my car for a while, breathing the cool night air. I thought about the corridor, the laughter, the changing doors. I didn't want to think about it too hard. I didn't want to lose my mind over it. I took another sip of water from a bottle in my trunk. My throat hurt a bit. My hands were still unsteady. I approached the fence one last time, shining the flashlight into the lot. I saw only dirt and trash, no silhouette, no sign of a house. I left. I drove home with the windows down, feeling the night air on my face. I locked my apartment door behind me and tossed the envelope and map into a drawer. I sat on the couch, trying not to think about what had happened. I just focused on the plain details. I went there. I entered something that shouldn't exist. I got out. Over the next few days, I went back twice. Each time, I found nothing. The silhouette didn't appear. The lot looked normal. I never found any explanation. The corridor, the doors, the laughter, they stayed in my memory. I thought about trying another full moon, but I stopped myself. I knew what I had experienced. I didn't want to risk entering that place again. My nerves were still on edge. Sometimes at night I thought I heard distant laughter in my apartment hallway, but I knew it was just my imagination. I still have that map. Sometimes I unfold it and look at the lines. They make no sense. They don't match what I saw inside. There's no reason to believe the place follows any rules I understand. I remember touching those doors and feeling the cold metal knobs. I remember shining my flashlight down an impossible corridor. I remember the feeling of my heart pounding, the way my hands shook, and the relief when I finally escaped. I have no proof that anything happened. I have no recordings or samples. I don't know who sent me that envelope. I haven't told anyone the full story because I don't think they would believe me. They would ask for evidence I don't have. They would think I made it up. But I know what I saw and what I felt. I know that place existed, at least for a while, and that I was inside it. I have decided not to investigate it further. I don't want to open that door again. I don't want to feel those corridors shifting and laughing at me. I don't want to lose my sense of direction in an endless hallway. I just want to move on and not think about it. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can picture that corridor extending in front of me, door after door, leading nowhere, laughing softly, and never showing a single living soul. I arrived in the village late in the afternoon. The sky looked clear, but the air felt cold. My luggage was light, a few books, some notebooks, my camera, and a flashlight. I had a single goal. I wanted to learn about the local legend. I had read about it in an old university journal. It described a place in the mountains where a strange creature haunted the old stone houses. The author had never visited the village. He had only collected rumors. Still, I wanted real facts. I wanted to see the place, talk to the locals, and note down what I observed. I checked into a small stone house that the locals rented out to visitors. The owner, an older man with a stiff way of speaking, led me inside, showed me the single bedroom, the kitchen area, and the small fireplace. He said very little. He handed me the key and left without another word. I found his behavior odd. Most people in remote villages are at least polite, but he seemed to avoid eye contact. I stood alone in that silent living room for a while. The walls were thick, made of heavy stone blocks. The furniture was simple: a wooden chair, a low table, a narrow bed in the corner. After settling in, I walked around the village before nightfall. The houses all looked similar: old stone walls, small windows, wooden roofs. The alleys were narrow and uneven. I tried saying hello to a few people, but they barely nodded. Nobody smiled. I noticed no loud conversation, no music, no activity other than a few people carrying firewood or closing shutters. I had planned to ask about the legends right away, but the unfriendly atmosphere pushed me back. I decided to wait, to not force any questions. I wanted them to trust me, or at least not to shut me out completely on the first day. When I returned to my rented house, the sun had gone down. I made a simple meal: bread, cheese, and water. I found some dried herbs in a small pouch near the fireplace and added them to the cheese for flavor. I didn't taste anything special. The silence grew thick. I could only hear the sound of a slight breeze passing between the stones outside. My flashlight and camera were on the table. My notes lay open. I tried writing down my first impressions. I wrote about the village layout, the people's silence, the heavy stone structures, and the strange mood. Then I heard a knock from somewhere behind me. It sounded like someone tapping lightly on a wall. I stood still and listened. The knock came again, a series of soft, dull hits, like knuckles on stone. I walked slowly around the room, trying to locate the sound. It seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. I pressed my ear against the cold stone. The knocks grew faint, then stopped. I felt a chill on my arms. I couldn't explain it. I had never heard stone walls make such a sound. I told myself it could be the pipes or maybe an old wooden beam shifting. But the walls were pure stone. I had seen no pipes. I went to bed early, feeling uneasy. The bed was firm, the blanket rough. I heard distant noises outside. Nothing strange, just the wind and maybe a wooden shutter banging. I tried to sleep. At some point deep in the night, I woke up to a sharper sound. It was not a creak or a shift. It sounded like someone knocking hard from inside the wall right next to my bed. I sat up. My heart pounded. I held my breath. The knocks came in a pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more knocks. I switched on my flashlight and examined the wall. Nothing. Just cold, rough stone. I stayed awake until morning. As soon as there was enough light, I examined every inch of the walls. I tapped them, pushed them, tried to see if any stone was loose. Everything felt solid. The mortar looked old but stable. I saw no cracks large enough for even a small creature. I checked the outside walls too. No gaps. I felt a bit embarrassed standing there in the morning light, knocking on stone walls. A villager passed by and watched me. I waved at him. He did not wave back. I spent the next day talking to a few locals. I approached them with neutral questions. I asked about the weather, about the mountains, about the houses. Most answered with a few words and then tried to leave. I mentioned I was a history professor. A couple of them nodded but said nothing else. When I finally asked, in a direct way, "Do you have any old legends around here?" One man looked at me with a flat face and said, "There are always old stories in old places." He wouldn't say more. Another person, a woman sweeping her doorstep, mumbled something I couldn't understand and turned her back to me. That evening I returned to the house and lit the fireplace. It gave off some warmth, but the corners of the room stayed cold. I arranged my notes on the table and tried to write down my second day's impressions. I wanted to record everything. While I wrote, I heard something like a soft whisper behind me. I turned. Nothing there. I listened carefully. I heard a faint voice, like someone trapped behind a wall, speaking words too soft to understand. I stood up, walked to the nearest wall, and pressed my ear against it. I heard a voice. It sounded human. It said something like "help," but with a broken tone, as if struggling to speak. I stepped back and felt my skin get goosebumps. I wasn't imagining it. There was a voice inside the wall. I tried talking to it. I spoke in a low, careful voice. "Who are you?" I said. "Are you stuck?" The voice did not answer. I only heard a sigh, and then silence. I waited, leaning against the table, trying not to panic. I thought maybe there was a crawl space or a hidden room. I considered the idea that someone might be playing a trick on me. Maybe the villagers did this to scare outsiders. Maybe they had a way to project sound through the stones. I had no proof. I decided to look for any sign of hidden doors. I spent over an hour running my hands along every wall, checking for seams or gaps. Nothing. Later that night, the knocking resumed. It started at one corner of the room, moved to another, then back again. Each time I rushed to the source, it stopped, as if whoever made the sound knew I was chasing it. My heart pounded the whole time. I felt sweat on my forehead. At one point I shouted, "Stop it!" hoping someone would react. The knocks went silent. For a moment I relaxed. Then I heard a low moan, like someone in pain. It came from behind the wall near the fireplace. I rushed there and tried to push the stones. They were firm and immovable. I hardly slept that night. I paced around the dark house, flashlight in hand, waiting for something else to happen. The temperature felt colder near the walls. I tried opening the window for fresh air, but the outside wind didn't help. I kept thinking that I should just leave, but I had come all this way. I wanted at least some solid fact about this creature. I wanted to understand what the villagers were hiding. The next morning I approached the man who had rented me the house. I told him about the noises. I told him I heard voices and knocks. He looked at me with no surprise. He said, "You're imagining things. Our walls are solid. There's nothing there." I insisted. He just shrugged and walked away. I felt anger rising inside me. They knew something. Their silence was intentional. I visited the small shop near the center of the village. It sold basic supplies, mostly dried goods and matches. I asked the shopkeeper if he knew any old stories. He said he had nothing to tell me. I noticed his eyes avoiding mine. I asked if outsiders often came to the village. He said yes, once in a while. I asked if they stayed long. He didn't answer. That afternoon, I wandered around the outskirts of the village. The mountains rose steep and dark. I found a corner of the village where old collapsed walls lay scattered. I saw stone blocks stacked in a loose pile. I examined them. They were heavy and rough. I noticed no smell of decay or anything that would suggest a body hidden inside. Just cold stone. I turned one block over and saw deep scratch marks on its underside, like someone had tried to claw their way out of solid rock. I felt a chill and put the block down. I headed back to the house, feeling tense. My chest felt tight. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted answers. That night I prepared for more disturbances. I lit the fireplace. I kept my flashlight in hand. I drank some water and sat at the table, facing the largest wall. I said out loud, "I know you're there. I don't understand what you want." Immediately I heard a light tapping inside the wall. I stood up, pressed my ear to the stone, and listened. The voice came again, a whisper, "Help. Cold. Trapped." I heard these words clearly. I asked, "Who trapped you?" The voice did not answer. I asked, "How can I help?" I heard faint sobbing. It sounded real. It sounded like a person in agony. I tried to think of a way to open the wall. I had no tools, just my flashlight and a small pocket knife. The stone was too hard. I used the knife's handle to tap on the wall. The knocks from inside responded. They followed my pattern. I felt my hands shaking. I wanted to leave the house and run down the street, but I was too curious. I asked again, louder this time, "How can I help you?" The voice just sobbed and whispered, "Help," over and over. I noticed the room's temperature dropping again. My breath felt visible in the air. The fire in the fireplace flickered, but it did not warm the place. I heard another sound coming from a different wall. More knocking. More voices. Now I heard multiple whispers, like a group of people trapped inside the stone. They all seemed to plead for help. I backed away, pressing myself against the door. I wanted to open the door and run outside, but I was worried that I might miss something important. My heart hammered in my chest. I clenched my jaw. I couldn't think clearly. The whispers continued. I yelled, "I don't know what to do. I can't break these walls." The whispers quieted down for a moment, then resumed. They didn't form any new words. They just repeated the pleas. The knocks grew louder, not violent but steady and insistent. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it along the surface of the walls, hoping to see some crack. I saw nothing, just old stones, carefully fitted together. After an hour of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside. The street was empty and dark. I stood there, breathing fast, feeling the cool air on my face. I saw no lights in other houses. Everything seemed quiet out there, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. I leaned against the stone wall of my house from the outside. It felt solid, no movement, no sound. Inside, I could still hear faint knocks. I spent that entire night sitting in a chair by the door, afraid to approach the walls again. My body felt tense, my head ached. Every so often I heard a whisper or a knock. It never faded completely. Sometime before sunrise, I heard footsteps outside. I rushed to the window and looked out. I saw 3 villagers walking past my house, not talking, not looking anywhere in particular. They moved at a slow pace, as if patrolling. I wondered if they knew what was happening. Maybe they did this every night, making sure the visitor stayed put. I tried to open the door and say something, but by the time I got outside, they were gone. In the morning, I decided to leave the village. I had gathered no real explanation, but I couldn't stand this place any longer. I packed my things quickly. While stuffing my notebooks into my bag, I heard one last knock from inside the wall. I said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." My voice cracked. I felt uneasy admitting defeat. I opened the front door. The owner was standing outside, waiting. He asked if I would be leaving. I said yes. He nodded. His eyes were calm, too calm. I said, "There's something in the walls. You know what I'm talking about." He didn't respond. He just shrugged. I asked if the villagers had done something wrong. He shook his head. I asked if the creature was dangerous. He said nothing. He just looked at me, as if I were wasting his time. I noticed how steady his gaze was, how his expression never changed. I walked away without pressing the issue. I felt the weight of something sinister behind me. I imagined those whispers continuing even after I left. I imagined other visitors hearing them too. I would find no proof. I had no recording, just my notes. I could write about it, but who would believe me? As I left the village and headed down the mountain trail, I noticed the silence outside. No birds, no insects, just a dull quiet. My legs felt stiff. My back hurt from lack of sleep. I kept walking, not looking back. I felt a steady, uncomfortable chill on my neck. It was nothing physical. It was just the leftover tension. I tried focusing on the steps ahead, on the trail's uneven stones. Eventually, the path turned and the village disappeared behind a bend. I sighed in relief. I never learned the full truth about that place. I know I heard voices inside those walls. I know I felt their cold and heard their pleading. The villagers said nothing. They didn't threaten me, but they didn't help me either. I left unharmed but unsettled. That was enough to convince me that their legend, whatever it was, had some real aspect to it. The fear I felt, the knocks, the whispers, I can't explain them. I'm a history professor. I rely on evidence, documents, and logical reasoning. But nothing there made sense. I still remember the feeling of pressing my ear to that stone wall and hearing a human voice begging for help trapped in solid rock. It was real to me, and that's all I have. I remember the day I first saw that old music studio. The lawyer handed me a small set of keys and an address. He said I had inherited it from a distant uncle I barely knew. I walked up to the front door on a gray afternoon. The building looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The paint on the wooden door had peeled off in uneven patches. The doorknob felt loose, and when I turned it, the hinges squeaked. Inside, the air smelled stale. The floorboards creaked with every step. I closed the door behind me and stood in the narrow hallway. The silence weighed on my shoulders. There was a large room ahead, separated by old sliding doors. I approached those doors slowly. My heart pounded. I don't know why I felt nervous. I just did. I pushed the doors aside and stepped into the main studio. There was a heavy piano at the center of the room, an old upright with a dark finish. The keys were slightly yellowed. A thin layer of dust coated almost every surface. Along one wall were shelves with stacked papers, rolled up sheets of music, and some wooden boxes. A few old chairs stood around, and heavy burgundy curtains hung over tall windows. The glass looked dirty, letting in only weak light. There was a standing mirror along the back wall. Its frame had some carved patterns that were chipped and worn. As I walked toward it, I noticed my reflection was a bit dim. The mirror was old, with slight imperfections. I saw myself covered in dust. I ran my hand over my shirt, but it made little difference. I spent the next hour or so going through the shelves. I found piles of old scores, some with names of composers I recognized. Others were handwritten notes with strange instructions and half-finished melodies. I tried to read them, but the handwriting was hard to follow. Some notes were scribbled in the margins, mentioning dissonant chords, odd timing, and strange arrangements of instruments. I didn't see anything special at first, just old music from a time long gone. I planned to gather the more interesting ones and see if I could make sense of them later. I checked the piano. Many keys were out of tune and a few stuck when I pressed them. The sound had a slight echo to it, like the room was designed for acoustics that no longer matched the instrument's condition. The echo bothered me. It didn't sound like a normal echo. It seemed to return at a slightly different pitch. I tapped a single key and listened. The sound faded. Then I heard a faint resonance that didn't match the note I had played. I tried another key, and it happened again. There was a slight delay, and the echo seemed to come from behind me or above me. I looked around, but I saw nothing unusual, just dust particles drifting in the stale air. Later that evening, I set up a small lamp and started to organize the sheet music. I wanted to figure out what I had inherited. The lawyer mentioned that decades ago famous composers used this studio. I found a small set of incomplete scores in a box pushed to the back of a shelf. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, but I could read some of it. These pieces had no titles. Some pages had large ink stains. The notes formed unusual progressions. I couldn't tell if they were mistakes or intentional. Curious, I placed a few sheets on the piano's stand and tried to play a short passage. As soon as I played the first few chords, I noticed something. The notes sounded rough and there was a strange reverb inside the room. I stopped and listened. The silence after I stopped playing felt thick. I played another chord. The curtains moved slightly as if a small draft had passed behind them. I walked over and checked the window. It was closed. There were no vents nearby. The curtains were still now, hanging without motion. I thought maybe I had caused some vibration. I returned to the piano and tried another line of the score. I played slowly, pressing each key carefully. The echo returned, but it didn't match my notes. It sounded like someone was playing a similar chord on a different instrument far away. I stopped again and listened, tilting my head, waiting. Nothing. Just the ticking of my wristwatch and the faint hum of distant traffic outside. When it started getting dark, I found the light switches. Only one overhead bulb worked. It cast a weak yellow light over the studio. I decided to sleep there. I had nowhere else to go at the moment. I set up a small cot in the corner and tried to relax. I heard the building's structure shifting. Old wood tends to groan at night. It didn't surprise me, but something else was off. At some point, I heard a faint scraping sound. It wasn't loud, more like a soft scratch against a wall. I sat up and looked around. The curtains were still. The mirror reflected the room just as it was. The piano stood silent. I didn't see anything. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something. It sounded like someone tapping a single piano key. Just one note, hit gently. I sat up on the cot and stared across the room. The piano keys looked still. I got up, walked over, and looked closely. Nothing moved. I pressed a key lightly. The sound rang out, and then the echo. This time the echo sounded more prominent. I leaned forward, listening. I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around fast, but I saw only the mirror and the old furniture. My hands felt clammy. I wiped my palms on my pants. The air felt colder. My breath came out in shallow bursts. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was my imagination. I moved to the shelves and scanned the titles of the old compositions again. Many had strange instructions like, play after midnight, or do not complete the final bar. It felt weird. I reached for one score that looked older than the rest. The paper was yellow and brittle. The notes on it formed awkward chords. I placed it on the piano and tried to play just a couple of measures. I struck a chord. The sound emerged, and I heard something move behind me. I froze. I turned slowly and looked at the mirror. My reflection stood there, tense. But there was something else. In the reflection, I saw a figure on the opposite side of the room. He wasn't there when I turned my head to look directly. But in the mirror, I saw him. He stood by the curtains, holding a violin. He wore dark clothes that seemed faded. His face was hard to make out. I only saw vague features like shadows on a blank surface. He lifted the violin to his neck and moved the bow, but I couldn't hear any violin sound. I only heard a faint whisper of something that didn't match my piano note. I spun around and looked at the actual curtains. No one was there. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was gone. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I backed away from the piano, breathing faster. I tried to leave the room, but the door handle got stuck. It wasn't locked. It just wouldn't turn easily. Eventually, I forced it open and stepped into the hallway. I leaned against the wall, my forehead sweaty. I didn't know what to think. I wasn't seeing things clearly. I waited in the hallway for a few minutes, trying to steady my nerves. Then I went back inside. The room looked normal again. No strange figures, no violinist. Just old furniture and a silent piano. The next morning, I went to a small convenience store nearby and grabbed some coffee and a sandwich. I sat on a bench outside before going back in. The daylight felt safe. I decided to continue exploring the studio. Maybe I had to know more. I searched a closet in the hallway and found a few notes from my uncle. They talked about strange events in the studio. He mentioned hearing odd echoes and seeing someone in the mirror who did not match anyone in the room. He wrote that certain unfinished scores caused unusual sounds. He warned himself to never complete them. He never said why. He never mentioned death or anything like that. He just said the presence in the studio grew stronger when certain chords were played. I read his words several times. My stomach tightened. I understood now that he had experienced similar things. That night, I returned to the main room and turned on the overhead light. I decided to try something. I took one of the incomplete scores and tried playing it very softly, just a few notes at a time. I was careful to listen closely. I noticed that after each chord I felt a slight pressure in the air behind me. It was subtle, like someone stepping closer. I played a few more notes and then stopped. The silence felt heavy. I checked the mirror again. Nothing unusual. The curtains hung still. I tried tapping on the wall. Solid wood. I listened to the floorboards. They creaked when I moved. Everything seemed normal if I didn't play the music. I spent several days cataloging the sheets. During the day, nothing strange happened. The odd echoes were still there, but I could ignore them in the sunlight. I noticed that the presence, whatever it was, only felt stronger when I tried to make sense of those incomplete scores. I suspected they were composed to summon something. I had no proof, but the feeling inside my chest whenever I played them was enough. I decided to stop playing the unfinished pieces focusing instead on well-known works that had been stored there. When I played a regular piece, the piano sounded normal and no strange echoes followed. The curtains stayed still and no figure appeared in the mirror. But my curiosity got the better of me after a while. One evening, I locked the door to the studio and closed all the windows. I wanted no distractions. I chose a short section of the most incomplete score and played it note by note. My fingers pressed each key lightly. After each chord, I paused and listened. At first, nothing. Then the echo returned. It sounded like a faint hum this time. I played the next chord, and I felt a cold draft on the back of my neck. I turned quickly, expecting to see the figure. Instead, I saw the mirror's reflection. The violinist stood there again, this time a bit clearer. I saw him lift his violin and move the bow slowly. Still no sound. I noticed his eyes were hollow, as if he had none. I could see the studio behind him in the reflection, but no one actually stood there when I looked away from the mirror. I felt my heart pounding. I backed away, but I still faced the mirror. The figure seemed to lean forward, as if listening to me play. I could not make out any details on his clothes except that they were old-fashioned. I stopped playing and pushed the score away. I stepped back and waited. The reflection returned to normal. My own image stared back. I wiped sweat from my forehead and breathed fast. My arms felt weak. I sat down on a chair and tried to think of what to do next. I decided to avoid those scores completely. I took all the unfinished pieces, put them into a box, and pushed it deep under a shelf. For a few days I left the studio every evening and stayed in a cheap motel. I tried not to think about it. When I returned, I left the mysterious sheets alone. I played only neutral pieces, random scales, or I just sorted through old boxes. But every night I slept there, I heard small sounds. I heard the piano creak as if someone pressed a key softly. I heard the curtains flutter even though no windows were open. I heard faint tapping sounds coming from corners of the room. These were quiet but impossible to ignore. I tried covering the mirror, but the sheet I hung over it kept sliding off by morning. I checked the window frames for drafts and found none. The doorknobs rattled softly now and then, as if someone gently tested them from the other side. On one particular night, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I thought if I played all the chords in one of the unfinished scores quickly, maybe I could see what this presence really was. I turned on all the lights I could find. I placed the score on the stand and set my fingers on the keys. My heart was racing. I pressed down on a series of chords, ignoring how strange they sounded. The piano's voice cracked and groaned. The echo came back louder, mismatched, almost a sighing sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I forced myself to continue. Each chord felt heavier. The air got colder. I felt my hands shaking. Then I dared to look in the mirror. The figure was there, closer, right behind my shoulder in the reflection. He moved the bow of his violin along the strings slowly. I saw his arm move. I heard nothing from the violin, but I heard him breathe. A soft, raspy breath near my ear. I froze. I stopped playing and jumped up. I turned around and nothing was there. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection alone. The figure was gone. I realized I would never find peace here if I tried to finish those pieces. The presence would not leave me alone. Each chord drawn from those strange manuscripts brought it closer. It never spoke. It never touched me. It never harmed me. But it made sure I couldn't relax. I couldn't compose anything new. Every time I considered working on my own music, I thought about that presence. I stayed up late, just sitting at the piano, afraid to press a key. Eventually, I only walked around the studio, tidying shelves, dusting surfaces, avoiding the piano altogether. After a few weeks, I accepted that I couldn't break this cycle. The presence lingered, waiting for me to make a move, waiting for me to play something that would give it more ground. I kept the old scores hidden. I avoided the mirror, sometimes pushing it against the wall so I wouldn't catch a glimpse of anything behind me. The curtain still moved sometimes. The echoes still didn't match the notes. But as long as I didn't play those unfinished pieces, the presence stayed quiet. It hovered behind me like a watcher, never leaving, never getting closer. I knew I could leave the studio and never return, but it belonged to me. It was a place meant for music. I tried playing my own simple melodies. When I did, I still felt tension. My hands were sweaty and my stomach churned, anticipating something behind me. The presence was always there. I learned to play fewer notes each day, never settling into a rhythm that might attract it again. The curtains would shift a little, as if reminding me it was still present. The mirror would show me my own frightened expression, so I remained stuck in this strange coexistence. The presence didn't leave. I didn't dare to provoke it again. I tried to restore the piano's tuning, but each time I tested a note, I listened carefully for the echo. The echo never went away. It didn't matter what I played. A part of me knew that no matter what I did, I'd never compose in this space without feeling that cold pressure behind me. My hands would always shake. My breathing would always shorten. I would always check the mirror, expecting to see that violinist lurking in the reflection. As time passed, I accepted that this was my inheritance. A studio haunted by an invisible presence that responded to certain chords and incomplete melodies. I accepted I would never find calm here. No death, no final horror, just this constant tension. Every chord I played reminded me that something watched from behind. I eventually stopped trying. I kept the piano closed, the scores locked away, and learned to live with the silence, the echoes, and the soft movements at night. Each time I thought about pressing a key, I remembered that hollow figure in the mirror and the faint sound of breathing near my ear. It was enough to keep my hands away from the keys. It was enough to keep me restless and uncertain, knowing I would never compose in peace. I opened the old wooden door and stepped into the barn. The smell of rotten hay and dust hit my nose right away. I remembered the place as a kid, but now it was empty and quiet. There were broken boards on the floor, rusted tools on the walls, and a few old barrels stacked in the corner. I came back to find my grandfather's old pocket watch. My mother said it was left behind when we abandoned the farm years ago. I did not want to return, but I needed to. I wanted that watch because it belonged to him, and he left it for me. Now I was here, alone, inside this barn, feeling something strange. I heard a soft creaking sound above me. There was no breeze, no open windows. Still, the doors moved slightly, as if touched by an unseen hand. I kept my steps slow. I could hear my own breathing. It felt too loud. The barn smelled like mold and old straw. Dust floated around me whenever I moved. My boots scraped against the dirt and small stones on the ground. The rafters above were dark and long chains hung down, swaying very gently. I looked at them carefully. I could not see why they moved. I felt my heart pounding. I remembered the stories my grandmother told me about strange things that happened here after my grandfather passed. I tried not to think about it. I just wanted the watch. It was probably stored in a small wooden chest he kept in the back. I remember that chest. It was always locked, and he never told me what else he kept inside. I just knew the watch was there. I took a few steps forward. The chains moved again. They rattled. I felt sweat forming on my neck. My throat went dry. I looked around. There was nothing that would cause these movements. No wind, no animals, no one else here. I tried to ignore it. I had to find that chest. I walked toward the rear of the barn where a pile of old tools and planks rested against the wall. I heard a voice. It was quiet, like a whisper. It said my name. It was not loud, but I heard it. I stopped. I felt my heartbeat increase. I listened. Nothing. Just the sound of my breathing and a faint drip of water somewhere in the corner. I shook my head and told myself I was just nervous. I had not been here in years. Everything felt wrong, but maybe it was just my imagination. I kept walking, pushing aside some wooden boards and a broken ladder. Underneath, I found a dusty old box. It looked familiar. I knelt down and touched it. The surface felt dry and cracked. The latch was rusted. I tried to pull it open, but it was stuck. I searched around and found a small piece of metal that I could use as a makeshift lever. I tried to open the box again. As I pressed the metal into the latch, I heard that whisper again. It said my name, a bit louder this time. I turned around fast, holding the metal bar in my hand like a weapon. I saw something in the corner near the doorway. It looked like a dark shape, a figure with no clear details. It stood still. I could not see a face or hands. It was like a silhouette. I stepped back and almost tripped on the box. I felt my chest tighten. My breathing got faster. I thought about running, but I wanted that watch. I tried to speak, but my voice sounded weak. I said, "Who's there?" The figure did not answer. I could not hear anything but the small, soft sound of chains moving above me. I tried to focus. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was a shadow from something outside. I walked a few steps toward it, holding the metal bar up. It did not move. I approached slowly. My stomach felt tense and my legs felt heavy. When I got closer, it faded. It was not like it disappeared suddenly. It just sort of blended into the darkness. I swung the metal bar through the spot where it stood. Nothing was there. I turned back toward the box and tried to calm down. I told myself I had to keep going. I knelt down again and pried open the latch. The box creaked. It was dark inside the barn, but some light came through the gaps in the walls. I could see the shape of something wrapped in cloth. I reached in and felt around. The cloth was rough. Inside it, I felt something small and round. It had a chain attached to it. I smiled for a second, relieved that I found the watch. Before I even pulled it out, I heard a scraping sound on the floor behind me. I froze. My back felt cold. I looked over my shoulder and saw something move near the wall. I stood up with the watch in my hand, still wrapped in cloth. I looked at it and felt a sense of relief, but I also felt dread. The presence in the barn seemed stronger. As I moved toward the exit, the doors creaked. They moved a few inches. I tried to understand what was causing it. There was no wind. I walked slowly, keeping my eyes on every corner. The barn felt cramped, like it was closing in on me. The chains overhead rattled again, louder this time. I looked up and saw them swinging more than before. I whispered to myself, "I need to get out." I held the watch tight and stepped forward. The dirt floor felt loose under my boots. I tried to walk straight for the door, but I heard that voice again. It said my name, louder, almost hissing. I stopped. My pulse was hammering. My hands were sweating. I gripped the watch until my knuckles hurt. I forced myself to keep moving. I did not want to talk to it. I did not want to look at it. I just wanted to leave. Halfway to the door, I saw the figure again. It was near a large wooden beam. It seemed darker than the shadows around it. I saw it tilt its head, or at least it seemed to. I heard a faint whisper, not words, just a soft sound. I looked for any detail, feet on the floor, eyes, anything, but there was nothing. It was like a hole in the darkness. I felt my stomach churn. I raised the metal bar again and said, "I'm leaving. I have what I came for." The figure did not move. I stepped to the side, hoping I could circle around it. As I moved, the figure shifted. It stayed in front of me, blocking my direct path. I looked down at the watch in my hand. I could see a bit of detail now. It was an old silver pocket watch with a chain and a small latch. My grandfather always carried it. I remembered the ticking sound it made. Now it was silent. I wanted to open it, but my hands were shaking. I kept my eyes on the figure. I stepped left again. The figure swayed slightly. I heard the chains above creak and rattle. One of them hit a beam and made a sharp metallic sound. I flinched. The figure remained in place. I tried a different approach. I decided to walk straight at it. I moved forward, gripping the watch and the metal bar. My heart felt like it would burst. I took one step, then another. The figure got clearer. It was not just darkness. It had a shape like a tall man wearing dark clothes, but I could see no details at all. It was like looking at a person painted completely black, standing still. The whispering became clearer. It said my name over and over slowly, each time quieter but more insistent. I felt my legs tremble. I felt a chill on my arms and face. I stopped a few feet away. I realized I was breathing hard. I tried to calm down. "I'm taking this watch," I said. "I don't know what you are, but I'm leaving." The figure stayed silent. I stepped forward. It moved away, sliding backward into the shadows. For a second, I thought I could escape. I hurried toward the door, not looking back. The door was half open, but as I got close, it creaked and swung inward, closing halfway. I reached out and pulled it, but it felt heavier than before. I strained my arm muscles. It gave an inch or two, then stopped. I tried again, pulling with all my strength. My fingers slipped on the old wood. My hand hurt from the pressure. I let go and stepped back, breathing fast. I turned around and saw the figure near the back of the barn. The chest was still open. I saw the cloth lying on the floor. It felt like the figure was attached to that spot, to that chest, to the watch. I realized I needed to open the watch. Maybe there was something inside it that would help me. I gritted my teeth and found a stable spot to stand. I placed the metal bar under my arm and tried to open the watch with my thumb. The latch was stiff. I pressed harder. Finally, it opened with a click. Inside, I saw the watch's hand stopped at a certain time, probably the time my grandfather last wound it up. There was no inscription, just old, faded numbers. I expected something else, but it was just a watch. I looked back at the figure, confused. It remained still, its presence heavy in the barn. The chains rattled. The doors creaked again, moving slightly. I tried to talk again. "I have the watch. I'm leaving. Let me go." The figure did not respond. I felt trapped. The silence pressed against my ears. I could hear my heart pounding in my own skull. I had to find a way out. Maybe a window, maybe a loose board. I walked along the side of the barn, keeping my eyes on the figure. It did not rush at me. It did not vanish. It just stood there, watching, or at least facing my direction. I found a loose board near the corner. I tried to pull it off. My fingers hurt on the rough wood. I managed to get some leverage and yank it loose. Behind it, there was nothing but more boards. No exit there. I cursed under my breath. I considered running at the door and trying again. I turned toward the door and saw it had opened a few inches again. I did not understand how. I moved toward it, slowly. The floorboards squeaked under my feet. The figure stayed behind me. I felt its presence on my neck, like it was staring at me. Every hair on my arm stood up. I got to the door and pulled. It moved a bit more this time. I realized it was giving way slowly. I tried to ignore the rattling chains. I tried to ignore the voice whispering my name. I focused on the door. I pulled harder, grunting, putting all my weight into it. The door gave another inch, then another. I felt a rush of fresh air against my face. It smelled better than the inside of the barn. I pulled again, and the door opened enough for me to slip through. I heard a sudden scraping sound behind me. I turned my head and saw the figure moving closer. It did not walk like a person, it just glided forward, slow and steady. I felt panic rising in my chest. I stepped outside and turned around to look back in. The figure stopped at the threshold, just inside the barn. It did not come out. It stayed there, almost blending with the darkness inside. The chains were still rattling. The doors creaked again, but this time from outside, I could see no wind, no reason for them to move. I backed away, still holding the watch. The figure stayed where it was. Its whispering stopped. I felt my breathing slow down a bit as I realized it was not chasing me outside. I put the watch in my pocket. My hands were shaking and my legs felt weak. I looked around the old farmyard. The grass was overgrown and the old house next to the barn was boarded up. I wanted to leave right away. I turned and walked toward my car, which I had parked near the entrance to the property. Every step felt heavy, but with each one I felt better. I could still smell the barn on my clothes, that stale air and moldy straw scent. As I reached my car, I turned back to look at the barn one last time. The doors were closed again. The place looked normal from the outside, just an old abandoned building. But I knew what I had seen. Something was in there. Something that did not want me to take the watch. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away, trying not to look back. My chest still felt tight and my head was pounding. I wanted to get far away from that place. On the road, I pulled over after a few miles to catch my breath. I took the watch out of my pocket and opened it again. The hands were still stopped, pointing at an old time that meant nothing to me. There was no inscription, no message. But I had the watch, and that was all I came for. I did not understand what that figure was or what it wanted. I did not know why it whispered my name. I only knew that I had gotten out and that it stayed behind. I never wanted to return to that farm again. I did not care if the figure stayed there forever, guarding that barn and those old chains. I had what belonged to my grandfather and I was done. I started the car again and kept driving. Even though my hands trembled on the steering wheel and my ears still rang with that whisper, I was leaving. I was leaving, and I was not going back. I saw the old gate leaning against a broken hinge when I arrived. The paint on the metal bars had flaked off long ago, leaving behind rough brown patches of rust. There was no one around. The wind pressed a damp smell of rotting leaves against my nose. I had not been back here since I retired. I never planned to return. But I came anyway. I was not sure why. Maybe I just wanted to see what became of the place. Maybe I wanted to settle something in my mind. I stood there looking at the front doors of the old sanatorium. They were closed but not locked. The front windows were covered in a layer of dust and dirt. I could not see inside clearly. I pushed on the doors and they opened with a dry scraping sound. I stepped into the lobby. The air inside felt heavy and smelled stale, like wet paper and old cloth. There was a wide reception desk to my left. The surface was chipped and the drawers hung open, empty. I remembered sitting behind that desk in my white uniform, listening for the sound of patients arriving in wheelchairs or on gurneys. Now the floor was covered in dirt and crumbled plaster. The ceiling above had a large crack. I could see a piece of metal pipe running overhead, a few drops of water gathering and then falling slowly onto the floor. I heard something rustle behind me. I spun around. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind pushing through the gaps in the old window frames. My heart beat a little faster. I walked forward slowly, stepping over broken tiles and scraps of old paperwork. I tried to breathe quietly, but my breaths came out in short puffs. I told myself I was just nervous. It was normal to feel like this in a place that used to be full of people, and now was empty. I moved into the main corridor. The walls had peeling paint. The color used to be pale green, but now it looked like patches of mold and grime. The overhead lights were gone, leaving only open sockets. The hallway stretched out ahead, lined with rooms where patients had once stayed. I remembered pushing medication carts along this corridor. I remembered the quiet murmurs of people who did not know their own names. I took another step and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. Then I heard laughter. It came from somewhere behind the closed doors. The sound was soft and distant. There was also a quiet sobbing mixed in with the laughter. It did not sound right. I could not tell if it was male or female, old or young. I pressed my ear against one of the doors. Inside, it was silent. I tried the handle. The door opened with a crunch and I stepped inside. The room had a single bed frame with no mattress. The metal was rusted and bent. There was a small table in the corner missing a leg. The floor was damp. I smelled something like moss and old wood. I listened carefully, but I heard nothing now. I turned to go back into the corridor, and in the doorway, I thought I saw a shape pass by. It was fast and silent, like a shadow without a person. I rushed forward into the hall. Empty. I stood there, heart pounding, trying not to panic. I kept moving, checking each room. Most were empty. Some had overturned chairs, broken cabinets, or piles of old sheets rotting on the floor. In one room, there were several rusty bed frames lined up. I swear I saw a figure standing at the far end near the window. It looked human-sized, but had no distinct face or features. I blinked and looked again. It was gone. I walked toward the window, feeling the uneven floor under my boots. The window was dirty. Outside, I could see the tall grass and a few dead trees. There was no one out there. I heard that strange laughter again. It echoed through the corridor. I followed the sound. My throat felt dry and my palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants. I heard soft crying now. It sounded like a patient in distress, someone in need of help. My old nurse instincts told me to see if I could help, even though I knew this place had been abandoned for years. I moved toward the sound. It seemed to shift from one hallway to another. I passed an old treatment room. Inside, I found a few gurneys with their wheels rusted in place. One gurney still had a stained sheet draped over it. I lifted the sheet. There was nothing underneath, just a bare metal surface and some dirt. I left the room. As I moved deeper into the building, I began to feel a pressure behind my eyes. My head started to ache. The sound of crying and laughing came and went. Sometimes it sounded very close, just behind a closed door. Other times it was distant, as if at the far end of the corridor. The temperature seemed to drop. My arms felt cold. I rubbed them and tried to stay calm. I told myself I was imagining things. There were no patients here. No one had died here that I knew of. The place had closed for other reasons, yet the sounds continued. I decided to head to the old nurse's station. It was at the far end of the east wing. I remembered the route. I followed the main corridor, turned left at the broken water fountain, passed a line of storage rooms, and then reached the station. The door was open. Inside, there was a large wooden counter, a few old cabinets, and a line of lockers where we used to keep our personal items. The lockers were all open and empty. The cabinet doors were half broken. Some medical files lay scattered on the floor. Their ink faded. I knelt down and picked up a file. It smelled like mildew. The name was smudged. The date was from decades ago. I flipped through the pages, but all the writing had faded. I dropped it and stood up. I felt dizzy. I pressed my hand against the counter. I heard the laughter again. It sounded like it was right behind me. I turned sharply. No one there. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. My pulse was racing. I walked out of the nurse's station and started back toward the main lobby. On the way, I heard a sudden bang. I froze. My legs felt weak. It sounded like a door slamming. I waited. I did not hear footsteps. I stepped forward carefully. I reached the intersection of the halls. The smell of mold was strong here. There was debris on the floor. I saw a figure at the end of the hall. It had a human shape, but I could not see a face, just a sort of gray blur where a head should be. The figure was still. I felt my throat tighten. My eyes watered. I wanted to speak, but I could not find words. I took a step toward it. The figure slipped behind a door, silent and quick. My chest felt tight. I moved faster now, trying to catch whoever it was. I found the door that the figure had passed through. It was an old ward room, large enough for several patients. I entered. The windows here were coated in dust. I could barely see outside. The ceiling had spots of black mold. Along the walls I saw old bed frames. Some were overturned. Others had straps dangling off the sides. In the corner there was a wheelchair with a broken wheel. I did not see anyone in the room. I circled around, checking behind the bed frames. Nothing. I spoke out loud, my voice shaky and quiet. "Who's here?" There was no answer. I stood in the center of the room, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. My stomach churned. The laughter came again. It sounded like it was right inside my ear. I jerked my head around. Nothing. Then I heard crying. It sounded muffled, like someone crying into a pillow. I followed the sound to a corner of the room where an old curtain hung from a rail. I pulled the curtain aside. There was only a cracked wall behind it. I rubbed my face with my hands, feeling sweat on my forehead. My breathing was rapid. My muscles felt tense. I hurried out of the room and tried to find another way back to the lobby. The building was silent except for my footsteps. I could hear dirt crunching under my boots. I passed a row of rooms I had not checked before. The doors were all closed. The door at the end was open. I looked inside from the threshold. It was a small storage room with shelves along the walls. Some old bandages and gauze strips lay scattered. The gauze was brown with age. I remembered rolling fresh bandages in this room and handing them to younger nurses. Now it smelled like rotten wood. I stepped back into the hall. I turned and caught a glimpse of something moving behind the dirty window at the far end of the corridor. It looked like a face, but there were no features, just a blank shape pressed against the glass. I walked toward it. Each step felt heavy. I could hear my heartbeat. When I reached the window, I saw only dust and cobwebs on the other side. Outside, the grass moved in the wind. I placed my palm on the glass. It was cold and rough. I felt like I was not alone, but I saw no one. I forced myself to speak again. "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed in the empty corridor. I listened carefully. I heard a faint sobbing sound near the stairwell. I followed it, stepping over broken tiles and chunks of plaster. The stairwell door was half open. I saw the stairs going down. They were concrete and covered with dirt. I took a few steps down. The air smelled damp and stale. I held the railing. It was cold under my hand. The crying seemed to come from below. I descended slowly, feeling each step under my boots. At the bottom, I reached a small basement corridor. It was dark, but a bit of light came from a cracked window near the ceiling. I saw old pipes running along the ceiling, dripping water. The floor was wet. I stepped carefully, the sound of my boots splashing lightly. The crying had stopped. I turned a corner and saw another figure, standing at the far end. It looked like a person in a hospital gown. The gown was stained and torn. I could not see a face. It seemed to shake slightly as if laughing or crying. I opened my mouth, but my throat was too dry to speak. I took a step forward, and the figure disappeared around the corner. My legs felt weak, and my eyes stung with sweat. I wanted to leave. I turned around and climbed the stairs back up. I nearly tripped on a loose tile. I rubbed my eyes with the back of my hand. When I reached the top, I walked quickly toward the main lobby. I wanted to get out of this place. My heart was pounding and my head throbbed. I could still hear quiet sounds behind me. Sometimes I thought I heard laughter, other times crying. I did not look back. In the lobby, I pushed the front doors open again. They scraped loudly against the old floor. Outside, the air smelled fresh compared to inside. I sucked in a deep breath. My shoulders felt tight and my hands were shaking. I looked back at the building. I could see dirty windows, broken roof tiles, and patches of moss on the stone walls. I stared, waiting to see if any figure appeared at a window. Nothing moved. I waited for a long moment. My clothes felt damp with sweat. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself I had imagined it all, that my memory and the silence of the place had played tricks on me, but I could still feel the tension in my muscles. I could still remember the faceless shapes and the strange sounds. I shook my head. I was not sure what I had experienced. I only knew I had felt something unnatural inside those halls. I had seen things that should not be there. I had heard voices that did not belong to anyone real. I walked away from the sanatorium, back through the old gate and onto the overgrown path. As I moved farther from the building, the heaviness in my chest began to ease. The sounds faded. The wind felt cooler on my face. I glanced back one last time. The building stood silent and empty. I saw no one, I heard nothing, but I remembered what I saw and heard inside. I clenched my jaw and kept walking. I did not look back again. I remember standing outside that old mansion and holding my camera in my right hand, feeling my fingers pressing hard against the grip. I had heard about this place from a friend who said it would give me interesting angles and textures for an artistic photo series I was working on. The windows were cracked, the paint on the doors was chipped, and the fence around the property was bent and rusted. There was no gate, just a wide opening that once had a set of iron bars. I could see dried leaves piled in corners and a few fallen branches scattered across the yard. I told myself I could handle this. I just wanted some shots of old furniture, peeling wallpaper, and maybe a few dusty hallways. I had no idea what I would find inside. When I walked through the front entrance, I had to push hard. The door was swollen in the frame. It scraped against the wooden floor. The place smelled like old paper and moldy fabric. I could see dust floating in the beam of my flashlight. The main hall was empty. No furniture. Only some torn carpet along the edges and a few dark stains on the floorboards. I started to take some test shots right away. I raised my camera, aimed at a corner, and fired the flash. The burst of light was bright and quick. The shot showed nothing unusual on the camera's preview screen, just a corner with peeling wallpaper. I moved on. I had a tripod strapped to my shoulder, but I didn't set it up yet. I wanted to scout the place a bit. I walked down a long hallway on the right side of the main hall. My boots made soft creaking sounds on the boards. The air felt heavier there, and the walls were darker. I came across a broken mirror leaning against the wall. I pointed my camera at it and took a shot with flash. The flash lit up the dust in front of me. On the camera's small screen, I noticed something odd. There was a shape behind me in the photo, like a thin figure standing next to my shoulder. It looked skeletal. I turned around fast, raising my flashlight. There was nothing there, just empty space. I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. I told myself maybe it was some trick of the light or a piece of furniture I hadn't noticed. But there was nothing behind me. The hallway was empty. I took another shot, aiming at the same spot. The flash popped again. When I checked the screen, I saw that figure again, now slightly to the side. It looked translucent. I couldn't make out details, just a skull-like head and a bony frame. I turned around again, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. I felt my throat getting dry. I tried to clear it, but it didn't help. I moved further down the hallway. The floor felt uneven. I stepped carefully. There were cracked boards here and there. I reached a room on the left, pushed the door, and it swung inward, releasing a gust of stale air. Inside, I could see a large wooden table covered with a thick layer of dust. There were empty picture frames on the walls. I took a few steps in and aimed my camera at the table. I fired the flash. Checking the screen, I saw multiple shapes this time. They were faint, standing around the table. All of them looked like skeletal figures. Some appeared taller, others shorter. They had no color, just a pale, almost transparent outline. I heard a faint sound from the hallway, like a soft shuffle. I turned around slowly, shining my flashlight. Nothing was there, just silence. I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried to breathe steadily. I told myself I could leave any time. I wasn't trapped, but I wanted my shots. I had a strong urge to document these things. I couldn't see them with my own eyes. They only appeared in the camera's flash. It felt wrong, but also intriguing. I took another shot without moving. On the screen, the figures had changed positions. They were closer to me now, almost at my side. I could see the outline of their arms and ribs. No clothes, just thin, bony silhouettes. I backed away until I hit the door frame with my shoulder. I tried again with the flashlight alone, searching the room. Nothing visible, just dusty air and old wood. My heart was beating faster. I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. I decided to leave that room and head back to the main hall. I walked quickly, keeping my flashlight in front of me. The hallway felt longer than before. I looked at my watch. The time was normal, but I felt as if I had been inside for hours already. When I returned to the main hall, I stood still and listened. The house was quiet. I heard the distant sound of a car passing on a nearby street. That gave me a bit of comfort. I wasn't completely isolated. I took a deep breath and tried to decide what to do next. I chose a different direction. A corridor on the opposite side of the main hall. There were doors on both sides. Some were closed, some open. I stepped into the first open door on the left. It was a small room with a single chair under a broken window. I took a photo with flash. On the screen, I saw one figure sitting in the chair, facing away. When I lowered the camera and looked directly, the chair was empty. I took another shot. The figure was now standing in the corner, facing me. I felt my legs tense up. My heart thumped. I tried to steady my hand, but it shook a bit. I left that room and tried another. This one had an old bed frame without a mattress. When I flashed the camera, I saw two figures near the bed frame. They were leaning over it, as if examining it. I shot another photo. They were gone from the screen. I tried a third time, and now one stood at the doorway right behind me in the picture. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight into the empty corridor. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My breathing was shallow. I realized they could appear anywhere in the flash, but never when I looked directly. It made me feel surrounded, cornered by something I couldn't confront. I decided to go upstairs. The mansion had a grand staircase at the end of the hall. The steps were dusty but sturdy enough. I climbed carefully, listening for any sounds. Nothing but my own breathing and the rustle of my clothes. The second floor had a long hallway with closed doors. I tried the first door. Locked. The second door opened with a squeak. Inside, I saw empty shelves and a broken lamp on the floor. I took a flash shot. On the screen, one figure crouched by the lamp. I took another shot. It stood tall, facing the door. Another shot. It was closer. I stopped taking pictures and backed out into the hall, feeling my shoulder blades tense. In the hallway, I raised my camera and took a shot without aiming at anything in particular. When I looked at the screen, I saw figures all along the hall, standing at intervals. They looked like they were waiting. I lowered the camera. The hallway looked empty again. I leaned against the wall, breathing through my mouth. My hands felt clammy. I thought about leaving, but I wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to capture something clear. Maybe I could get a photo of one of them moving or changing position, something that proved I wasn't imagining things. I moved to another door and pushed it open. The hinges screamed. Inside was a bedroom bigger than the others. There was a large window covered by a heavy curtain. I tried the flashlight on the curtain. It was thick and covered in dust. I took a photo with flash. On the screen, 3 figures stood by the window. Another shot, and now they were at different parts of the room. One seemed to reach out, its hand or arm just a cluster of thin bones. I felt a chill in my chest. I said something out loud, maybe just a low curse to break the silence. My voice sounded strange in that room. I turned and left. I needed air. I headed back toward the staircase. I took photos as I went, just quick flashes. Each time I looked, I saw at least one of those figures. Sometimes they were far down the hall. Sometimes they appeared closer. They never showed up directly in front of me, always off to the side, behind me, or further ahead. It felt like they were circling me, staying just out of reach. My throat felt sore. My eyes stung from the dust. I kept blinking, trying to stay focused. At the top of the stairs, I aimed my camera down and took a shot. The flash lit the lower hall. On the screen, I saw a cluster of these skeletal shapes standing near the front door. I wanted to leave. I realized I had what I came for, or at least more than I expected. I had photos. Strange, unsettling photos. That would have to be enough. I just needed to get out without feeling like I was pushing through them. I took a second shot. On the screen, they were gone. I wasn't sure if they moved or if I had imagined the first cluster, but it felt more comfortable going down now. I descended slowly, shining my flashlight on each step. I didn't want to trip and fall. My legs felt a bit shaky. My back was tense. I could feel sweat under my shirt. In the main hall, I stopped and checked my camera. The battery was more than half gone. I had taken a lot of pictures. I decided not to take any more until I reached the front door. I stepped carefully, trying to keep my breathing steady. The floorboards groaned under my boots. When I reached the door, I pushed it. It stuck for a moment, then opened with a scraping sound. Fresh air hit my face. I stepped outside, feeling the light breeze. It was late afternoon, but the sky was still bright enough. I walked across the yard, keeping my flashlight off now. I didn't look back. I just wanted to get to my car. My car was parked a short distance away on a dirt patch by the side of the road. I could see it through some bushes. At the car, I fumbled with the keys. My hands were still shaking a little. I got inside and closed the door. I locked it out of habit. I looked at my camera again, flipping through the shots. They were all there. The figures were visible in every flash photo I took inside that mansion. I couldn't understand it. I tapped the screen, zooming in. They had hollow eye sockets and long spines. Their arms and legs looked like thin sticks. No clothing, no hair, just outlines of something I couldn't see with my own eyes. I didn't feel safer in my car, but at least I was out of that place. I started the engine. The sound of it helped calm me down. I checked the rearview mirror. Empty road. A few houses further down, no one around. I took a moment to catch my breath and think about what happened. I didn't feel like I had any answers, just a lot of unsettling images. My chest was still tight, but I could manage. I decided to drive away. As I pulled onto the road, I could see the mansion in my side mirror, standing there silent and gray. The upper windows looked dark and empty. I tried not to think about what was inside. On the way home, I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence. I tried to focus on the road, the passing trees, and the asphalt under my tires. I kept feeling like I should delete those photos and forget it, but I didn't. I reached home without trouble. I parked in my usual spot and went inside. My apartment smelled normal and warm. I closed the door, kicked off my boots, and went straight to my desk. I plugged my camera into my computer and copied the files. They opened fine. The images were the same as on the camera's screen. Pale, skeletal shapes in almost every frame. I found myself looking at them one by one, trying to see if there was any clue. They looked so plain, so straightforward. They stood in empty rooms, by broken furniture, near doorways. Some seemed to move closer between shots. I couldn't explain it. I felt a pressure in my forehead. I got up, drank some water, and sat down again. The images didn't change. They were not illusions from inside the mansion. They were real photos, as real as anything else. I decided to keep them, at least for now. I wouldn't show them to anyone yet. I didn't want questions I couldn't answer. I didn't feel hungry or sleepy. I just felt unsettled. I looked around my apartment, checking every corner. It was silly. I saw nothing strange. I turned off the lights in the other rooms, leaving only the small lamp by my desk. I stood there, listening to the hum of the fridge. No strange sounds, no figures. I checked the camera's memory card again to make sure nothing was corrupted. Everything seemed fine. I considered going back to the mansion another day, maybe taking different equipment. I dismissed that idea. I didn't want to see those figures again. I didn't feel threatened by them exactly, but I didn't like the idea of being surrounded by things I couldn't see. I didn't like the way they showed up only in the flash, as if they were waiting in the dark. I sat there for a while, running my hand through my hair, breathing slowly. Eventually I got up, closed my computer, and walked to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked normal, just a guy who had been inside an old house. I turned off the bathroom light and went to my bedroom. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. I listened to my own breathing. Nothing else. I told myself I was done with that place. In the following days, I didn't go back to the mansion. I kept the photos stored safely. Sometimes I looked at them, but not for long. They made my pulse quicken. They made me feel like I was back in that dusty hallway, hearing my boots on the old floorboards. I preferred to focus on other projects. But I knew those images were there, and I knew what I saw. It was enough to know that there were things inside that building that I could only see through a camera's flash. That was the truth I came away with. I never told my friend what I found. I never needed to. I still remember how my throat felt dry and how my hands shook. I don't need anyone else to believe me. I know what I saw, and that's enough. I pushed open the attic door and stepped inside, holding my suitcase in my left hand. The landlord had mentioned that the attic would be damp, but I hadn't expected the smell. It reminded me of stale air and wet clothes that had been left in a corner too long. The floorboards creaked under my feet when I walked to the small window at the far end. The light outside was weak. Clouds covered most of the sky, and the trees in the small backyard looked bent and thin. I turned around and took a better look at the room. The walls were old and rough, the paint peeling off in strips. I saw a small desk, a wooden chair with uneven legs, and an old mattress rolled up near the wall. I placed my suitcase near the desk and stood there breathing in the musty air. My plan was simple. I had come to this old Victorian house to write something, anything. My previous attempts at writing had been useless. I had run out of money. This was my last chance to focus without interruptions. The rent was cheap and I didn't care about the discomfort. I settled in. I took a few of my notebooks out of my suitcase and placed them on the desk. I ran my hand along the wooden surface. It felt rough. There were marks on it, small scratches and tiny dark stains. The attic was quiet except for a faint dripping sound somewhere behind the walls. I could see no source of the moisture, but the ceiling above me was discolored, showing irregular patches of darker wood. I pulled the mattress over and unrolled it. It smelled old and felt lumpy, but I didn't have another option. There was a single electrical outlet near the door, but it didn't work. I tested it with my phone charger, but no light came on the device. I had brought some candles and matches. They were my backup. I didn't mind writing by candlelight. It would at least give the room a steady glow. After arranging my things, I decided to sit at the desk and try to start writing. My idea was to write a short story about a traveler who never finds a place to stay. It was rough, but I had to start somewhere. I sat down, opened my notebook, picked up my pen, and tried to form the first sentence. As soon as I pressed the pen tip to the paper, I heard something tapping beneath the floorboards. The sound was light and quick. It was like the tip of a finger hitting wood. I froze and listened. The tapping continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I hesitated, unsure what to do. I pressed the pen to the paper again, and the tapping started again. This time it was a bit louder, almost like someone was knocking with their knuckles from underneath the floor. I lifted my feet and pressed down hard, hoping to scare away whatever was there. The tapping paused, then continued in a slow, steady rhythm. I tried to ignore it and wrote a sentence. The tapping grew louder. I wrote another sentence. The tapping continued. I stopped and waited. After a minute or so of silence, I tried again. The tapping came back. My heart was racing. My throat felt dry. I spoke aloud. "Hello?" expecting no answer. There was no reply, but the tapping stopped as soon as I spoke. I exhaled and rubbed my forehead. I decided I would try to write later. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was just the old house settling. I stood up and checked the floorboards. They looked normal, just old and slightly warped. I spent the afternoon reading some old notes and trying to brainstorm ideas. When evening came, the light faded. Without electricity in the attic, I lit a few candles. I placed them on the desk and on a small crate I had found in the corner. The candle flames were steady at first, but then a draft from somewhere made them flicker. Their light stretched across the walls, creating long shadows. I looked at these shadows. They weren't just random shapes. It looked like figures on the wall. I saw what appeared to be silhouettes of people standing close together. I turned my head to see if something was blocking the candlelight, but there was nothing. I stood up and moved around, but the silhouettes stayed. They shifted slightly as the candlelight danced. It looked like these shadowy shapes were moving in slow, gentle steps. It reminded me of people dancing in pairs, turning slowly, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to imagine things. I tried to see if something in the room was casting these shapes. There was no furniture arranged in such a way. The walls were bare except for peeling paint. I waved my hand in front of a candle. My hand's shadow appeared normally. But the silhouettes continued their slow movements on another part of the wall. My neck felt tense. My stomach was tight. I tried blowing out one candle. With one candle gone, the silhouettes faded slightly, but I could still see them as faint outlines. I relit the candle. They came back, more defined this time. I spoke quietly. "Who are you?" No answer. No sound. Only the distant dripping from behind the walls and the faint creaking of wood. I stared at the shadows. They made no noise, no whisper, no sigh. They only moved in slow, deliberate motions. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I turned around quickly, but saw nothing. I wanted to leave the attic and go downstairs, but I had paid for this space. I needed to write. I tried to ignore the shadows. I moved my chair so I wouldn't see them easily. I focused on my notebook and pen. I pressed the pen to the paper again. The tapping beneath the floor started once more. Now it felt more like fingers drumming on a table, except it was on the wood under my feet. I pressed down with my heel. The tapping paused, then resumed near the desk's legs. I shifted my weight and tried to concentrate. I couldn't form a single good sentence. I got up and tried to find the source of the tapping. The attic floor had no obvious opening. I knocked on the floorboards. They sounded solid, except in one corner near the window, where I heard a hollow echo. I considered lifting a floorboard, but I had no tools. I pressed my ear to that spot. The tapping started right below my ear, sudden and loud. I jerked back, almost falling over. I stood up, feeling my heart pound. I walked around the attic. I checked behind the old crates and boxes near the walls. I saw only dust, some cobwebs, old nails, and a few scraps of torn paper. I found nothing that explained the tapping. I decided to go downstairs and ask the landlord about it. I walked down the narrow stairs. The landlord's apartment was on the first floor. I knocked on his door. He opened it halfway and looked at me. He asked what was wrong. I mentioned tapping sounds in the attic floor. He shrugged and said the house was old, that maybe it was just pipes. I said I heard no rushing water, just tapping. He shrugged again. He said he never used the attic and had only stored a few things there. He said it was an old place, that strange noises were normal. I realized he had nothing to add. I thanked him and climbed back up. Back in the attic, I found the candles half burned. I replaced one with a fresh candle. As soon as I lit it, I saw the silhouettes again. They were clearer now, as if several people were standing together, holding each other's arms, turning slowly in place. They moved around in a circle on the wall, their shadows long and thin. I focused on their outlines. I saw what looked like old-fashioned clothes. Their posture seemed stiff. I couldn't see their faces, just dark shapes. I tried to find any object in the attic that would cast such shadows. There were no coats hanging, no statues, nothing that could explain this. I tried blowing out all the candles. The room went dark, and I stood still for a few seconds. In the darkness, I heard the tapping again. This time it was softer, slower, like a single finger tapping once every few seconds. I felt sweat on my forehead and my palms were damp. My mouth was dry and my arms felt weak. I fumbled for my flashlight in my suitcase. I turned it on, shining it on the walls. With the flashlight, there were no silhouettes, just the rough surface of the old walls. But I could still hear the tapping below the floor. I decided to write on my phone's notepad. My phone still had some battery left. I sat down, turned on the flashlight, and opened the notepad app. I typed a few words. The tapping responded with a quick sequence of knocks. I stopped typing. The tapping stopped. I typed again, and the tapping started again. It was like something reacting to each attempt to create words. I turned off my phone's screen. Silence. I turned it on and typed again. Tapping. I shook my head, frustrated. I spoke out loud. I just want to write. Leave me alone. The tapping paused for a long moment, then started again, softer but steady. I stood up, knees slightly shaking. I paced around the attic, listening. The tapping changed spots, sometimes under the desk, sometimes near the window, sometimes by the door. I tried stomping my feet to scare it away, but it didn't work. I sat on the mattress, holding my flashlight. I waited. Eventually, I got used to the tapping. I tried to ignore it and focus on the physical details of the room. The boards were dusty. The air felt heavy. The smell of damp wood made my nose itch. My back was sore from the tension. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. I went downstairs to the small kitchen area I was allowed to use. I took a sandwich I had bought earlier from my bag. I ate it cold and flavorless. I drank some water. I looked around. The house's hallway was quiet and empty. The landlord's door was closed. The living room downstairs was dim, with old furniture covered in sheets. I didn't linger. I went back upstairs, determined to ignore everything and just write. When I returned, the atmosphere felt heavier. I lit one candle and kept the flashlight ready. The silhouettes were back on the wall, moving slowly. They didn't stop this time, no matter where I placed the candle. They drifted along the walls, circling the attic. I could feel my chest tighten. My breathing was shallow, my legs felt stiff. I sat at the desk, pen in hand, and tried to write on paper. The tapping started again. I tried writing anyway. My pen scratched the paper. My handwriting was shaky. The tapping grew louder, then softer, then stopped, as if testing my patience. I forced myself to write a full paragraph. I wrote it fast, without thinking. The tapping seemed to respond with quiet pulses, sometimes slowing, sometimes speeding up. I paused and listened. Behind me, I heard a soft creak. I turned around, holding the candle. I saw nothing. I touched the wall. It felt cold. The silhouettes were now behind me. I turned and saw them again. They had spread across two walls, their forms turning, bending their arms slowly as if passing through one another. I tried standing close to the wall to see if my own body cast any part of these shapes. It didn't. My own shadow was small and clear, separate from the others. I spoke again. "What do you want?" No answer. Only the rustle of my clothes as I moved. I raised my voice. "I'm just trying to work." My voice sounded weak in that empty attic. The silhouettes moved in silence. The tapping resumed, one slow knock at a time. I felt a shiver pass through my arms. My scalp tingled. I rubbed my eyes and tried to remain calm. I couldn't think of a logical reason for this. But logic didn't matter right now. I was trapped with these things. They didn't harm me. They didn't break anything. They just watched and responded whenever I tried to write. I sat down again and attempted to write something else. I wrote about a person alone in a strange room, hearing sounds they couldn't explain. I described the tapping as I heard it. I wrote about my frustration. The tapping slowed to a gentle rhythm, like a quiet pattern meant to guide me. I wrote more. I filled a page. As I wrote, my breathing calmed. The silhouettes never left, but they seemed to keep their distance. They stayed on the walls, circling in the candlelight. I could see their heads tilt slightly, their arms lifting and falling, their bodies turning in a slow, steady motion. After a while, I placed my pen down and looked at what I had written. It was simple and direct. It had no clever phrases. It only described what I had experienced. I felt a slight release of pressure in my chest. I realized that the tapping had stopped. I looked at the walls again. The silhouettes were still there, but they looked fainter. The candle flame flickered. I took a deep breath. I knew I would have to sleep here. I couldn't afford a hotel. I decided to unroll my sleeping bag and lie down. Maybe I could rest, even if my heart was still beating fast. I set my notebook aside and lay on the mattress. I kept the flashlight within reach. I didn't blow out the candle. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep right away. I kept my ears open for any new sound. The attic was quiet, except for the distant dripping behind the walls. After a few minutes, I heard a soft scratch under the floor, but it was distant. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried not to think too much. I was tired, cold, and uneasy. My throat was still dry. In the dark edges of my vision, I could still sense movement on the walls. I didn't look. I faced the ceiling and waited for sleep. My muscles ached. My eyelids felt heavy. I knew the silhouettes and the tapping were not leaving. They were part of the attic. They had been here before me and would remain after I was gone. I didn't feel welcome, but I felt watched. They wanted me to know they were here. They didn't hurt me. They just refused to let me ignore them. I tried to breathe slowly. I accepted that I wouldn't find peace easily. I focused on the quiet moments between the dripping sounds. Eventually, my heartbeat slowed. My breathing became steady. I listened and waited, half awake, half asleep. No one spoke. No one cried. No one died. There were no sudden screams, only the quiet tapping below and the faint outlines on the walls turning in their slow, silent dance. I would endure the night. I would try to write again tomorrow. I remember the day I hung that Venetian mirror on my living room wall. It was late afternoon, and I had just come back from an antiques fair outside the city. I collect old things because I like their weight and detail. This mirror had a thick wooden frame with carved faces that looked like old tired men. The edges had small cracks and the glass looked slightly uneven. I liked that it didn't look perfect. I paid good money for it because the seller told me it was from Venice, probably 18th century, and I believed him. I didn't see any obvious signs that he was lying. I brought it home, wiped the dust off the surface, and put it up. As soon as I stepped back, I noticed something strange. My reflection stood there as it should, but I swear I saw its mouth move even though mine stayed closed. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. Then I checked again. My reflection stared back, not moving at all. I told myself I was just tired. I live alone. I have a 2-bedroom apartment with a small hallway and a living room that opens onto a tiny balcony. The place isn't special. I keep my collections around. Old statues, weird tools, vases. The mirror went on the largest empty wall. It looked good there, well-centered, and at first glance it made the room feel bigger. I sat down on the couch and looked at it from a distance. The carved faces on the frame seemed well done, detailed, and each face had a different expression. One looked like it was yawning, another looked angry, another looked confused. I got up and ran my finger along the carvings, feeling the rough texture and the slight stickiness of old polish. The mirror glass was cold when I pressed my fingertip against it. As it got darker, I turned on the overhead light and watched the mirror. I don't know why I kept focusing on it so much. Something about it made me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore this feeling by picking up a magazine, but every time I looked up, I thought I saw my reflection's lips twitch. I stood up and approached the mirror. I raised my hand and waved slowly. My reflection followed perfectly. I opened and closed my mouth. My reflection did the same. I waited, staring hard, until my eyes hurt. Nothing odd happened. Later that night, I turned off the lights before going to bed. The room got dark, except for a faint glow that seemed to come from the mirror's frame. I approached it, squinting. I could swear the wooden faces on the frame had a dim light behind them, like a weak candle flicker. I leaned in close, almost touching the wood with my nose. The room was silent except for a low hum from the refrigerator and my own breathing. Then I heard a faint sound like a soft sigh or a quiet moan. It came from the mirror. I stepped back, my heart thumping. I turned on the light again. The glow and the sound stopped. I stood there, breathing through my mouth, feeling a slight sweat on my forehead. I couldn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed thinking about that soft, lamenting noise. I thought maybe the wood was old and had tiny movements inside it, like how old furniture sometimes creaks. Or maybe I imagined it. I decided to ignore it and try to sleep. But my mind kept drifting back to the reflection that seemed to move its mouth on its own. The next morning, I got up and went straight to the living room. The mirror looked normal in daylight. I stood in front of it and inspected every inch. I touched the frame's carvings. The faces were just wood, unmoving. The glass was clear enough, maybe a bit old and wavy in certain spots, but nothing unusual for antique glass. I made faces at my reflection, stuck out my tongue, twisted my neck. Everything seemed normal now. I felt stupid for being so worried. I went about my day. I had some errands to run. I left the apartment, did some grocery shopping, and came back in the afternoon. The sunlight streamed in through the balcony door, hitting the mirror at an angle. As I dropped the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, I glanced at it. There it was again. My reflection's mouth seemed to move slightly right after I'd stopped moving. It looked like it was trying to form words. I walked up to the mirror and moved my mouth slowly, saying nothing, just opening and closing it. I stopped. My reflection stopped. I tried a few random gestures, stopping abruptly each time. Sometimes after I froze, I saw my reflection continue the movement for a fraction of a second. It was slight, but my chest felt tight every time I noticed it. I didn't know what to do. I decided to ignore it. I heated some leftovers, ate them in front of the TV, and tried not to look at the mirror, but I couldn't resist. Every few minutes my eyes darted toward it. By evening I was so distracted I turned off the TV and stood in front of the mirror again. I leaned in close and whispered, "What are you?" Of course I expected silence, but I saw something. The reflection's mouth opened just a little, and I heard something like a tiny hiss. My scalp tingled, and I took a step back. My heart was beating faster. I wiped sweat from under my arms with my hands. I felt a dryness in my throat. I coughed and tried to calm down, telling myself I was imagining things. When darkness fell, I turned off all the lights again. I stood by the window, letting some street light come in. The mirror's frame glowed faintly. I saw the carved faces shimmer. I leaned forward, careful not to touch it with my face. The faint moan or sigh came again. It was like distant wind through a crack in a door, but it came from the mirror. I got goosebumps on my arms and my stomach felt hollow. Then I saw the reflection. It stood there, mimicking my pose, but its eyes seemed more focused, more alert. I tried moving my head from side to side. The reflection followed perfectly. Then I stopped moving. My reflection's mouth opened. I heard a whisper, so quiet I had to lean closer. It said something like, "I know you." The voice was raspy and slow. I stumbled back, knocking into a small table behind me. A lamp fell off and hit the floor with a dull thud. My heart pounded. My throat felt tight. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I stared at the mirror, and the reflection just stood there, expressionless. The whispering stopped as soon as I turned the lights back on. The glow faded. The carved faces looked like normal wood again. I didn't sleep well that night. In bed, my mind raced. I tried not to think about ghosts or curses. I just wanted to find a logical explanation. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the old wood had tiny speakers. The dealer might have tricked me. That idea gave me some comfort. The next morning, I rushed to inspect the back of the mirror. I took it down from the wall. It was heavy. I placed it carefully on the floor, leaning it against the couch. I checked every inch of the back. It was just old wood, dusty and a bit rough. No wires, no devices. I tapped it with my knuckles. Solid. I turned it around, feeling a chill as I faced the glass. The reflection stared back. I pressed my ear against the frame. I heard nothing unusual, just my own heartbeat. I decided to leave it off the wall. I leaned it against the wall in my hallway where less light reached it. Maybe I just needed to keep it out of sight for a while. But that night, I still felt drawn to it. Around midnight, I left my bedroom and walked into the hallway. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The place was dim. I stood a few feet away from the mirror. My reflection stood there, shaped by the faint light coming from under the bathroom door. The frame glowed softly again. I heard the low moan. I felt my legs tremble. I clenched my fists. I whispered, "What do you want?" The reflection's mouth moved. I heard it say, "I can tell you things." Its voice was weak and airy, like a draft in an old attic. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My stomach tightened. I didn't answer. I just stared. I didn't know what else to do. The reflection continued, "I can tell you what you hide." I felt my scalp prickling. My breathing got heavier. I whispered back, "I don't hide anything." The reflection smiled. Its teeth looked the same as mine, but slightly darker. I noticed the muscles in my legs tense, ready to run. My mouth felt dry, and I licked my lips, but that didn't help. I turned on the hallway light and everything went quiet. The glow faded. The reflection went back to normal. My legs were shaking. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, breathing hard. My chest felt tight. I thought about covering the mirror with a sheet, but I was afraid to approach it. After a few minutes, I got up and grabbed a bed sheet from the closet. My hands shook as I threw it over the mirror. The cloth settled, hiding the frame and the glass. I stared at the sheet for a while, expecting it to move or show signs of light underneath. Nothing happened. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the voice over and over. The next morning, I decided to call the antiques seller. I found his business card and dialed the number. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. I left a brief message asking about the mirror's origin. I didn't mention what happened. I just said I was curious about its history. After that, I had breakfast and tried to distract myself by cleaning the apartment. Every time I passed the hallway, I saw that sheet covering the mirror. I felt uneasy, but at least it wasn't staring at me. Around midday, I decided to test it again. I went into the hallway and pulled the sheet off slowly. Nothing strange happened. The mirror looked normal in the daylight. I stood in front of it. I waved. The reflection waved. I turned my head, squinted, and tried to catch a delay. Nothing. It was perfectly normal now. I looked closely at the carved faces on the frame. They looked calm and still. I touched them again. Rough wood, a bit dusty. I thought maybe I had lost my mind the night before. Maybe I was half asleep and hallucinating. I felt my shoulders relax a bit, but as evening came, I started to feel anxious. I didn't want to turn off the lights again. I made some coffee and stayed in the living room with the TV on. Around 10 p.m., I muted the TV and listened. The apartment was quiet. My back felt tense. I got up and approached the mirror. I stood very close, peering into my own eyes. I inhaled slowly. I turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp on in the corner. The mirror's frame caught the faint glow. I saw a flicker. Then I heard the sighing again. My chest felt tight. My mouth went dry. I tried something different. I pulled out my phone and tried to film the mirror. As I raised the phone and looked at the screen, I saw myself holding the phone. Nothing strange. I recorded for a few seconds, then turned off the light completely, except for the phone's screen glow. The frame glowed faintly and I heard the moan again. On the phone screen, I saw only darkness. I pointed the phone flashlight at the mirror. The glow vanished. The moan stopped. I turned the flashlight off. The moan came back. I felt panic rising in my chest. I pressed my lips together to keep quiet. I whispered, "What do you want to tell me?" The reflection's mouth moved in the darkness. I leaned closer. I felt sweat trickling down my back. The reflection whispered, "I know your secrets." My heart pounded. My hands felt clammy. I said nothing. The reflection continued, "You keep things inside." Its voice sounded distant. I swallowed hard. I wanted to deny it, but I had no words. My body felt stiff. I stared at its mouth. Its lips moved slowly, forming silent words. I leaned even closer, until my nose almost touched the glass. My breath fogged the surface. I watched its lips. It whispered, "I can show you." I shook my head and stepped back. My legs were weak. I sank to my knees, my eyes watering. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt trapped, cornered by a piece of old glass and wood. I stood up and turned on every light in the apartment. Bright light flooded the place. The whispering stopped. I paced around, rubbing my neck and arms, trying to calm down. I looked at the clock. After midnight. I didn't want to spend another night with that thing uncovered. I grabbed the sheet again and covered it. This time I wrapped some tape around the top so it wouldn't slip. I pressed my ear against the sheet. I heard nothing. Just silence. I slept in short bursts that night. In the morning I checked my phone. The antique seller hadn't called back. I tried him again. Same result. I searched online for Venetian mirrors with carved faces. I found references to decorative styles, but nothing about whispering reflections. I gave up and closed my laptop. I decided to get rid of the mirror. I grabbed it by the sides and took it to my storage unit in the building's basement. It was dark and musty down there, but at least I wouldn't have to look at it. I leaned it against a wall still covered by the sheet. I locked the door and went upstairs. My apartment felt lighter without it. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it. I watched some shows, cooked a decent meal, and even had a beer to relax. But at night, alone in my apartment, I could still feel the tension in my neck and shoulders. I kept looking at the living room wall where the mirror had been. It was just an empty space now. I wondered if the mirror was glowing down in the basement, whispering to itself. I wondered if the wood faces were sighing in the darkness. I didn't want to know. I rubbed my eyes, took a shower, and went to bed. I slept better that night, but I still woke up feeling uneasy. I decided I wouldn't go near that storage unit again for a while. Maybe I'd sell the mirror. Maybe I'd never touch it again. For now, I was just relieved it wasn't in my apartment looking at me, whispering in that strange voice, telling me it knew what I kept inside. I don't want to think about what secrets it could reveal. I don't want to know if it can talk louder. I just know I never want to face that reflection again. I heard about this inn from a guy at a roadside diner. He told me it was a quiet place out in the hills far from the main road. He said the rooms were always empty so I wouldn't have to deal with noise from other guests. I have trouble sleeping most nights, and I wanted a place to rest without hearing cars, voices, or anything else. He said people who stay there get better sleep than anywhere else. He didn't say much else about it. He didn't smile. He just wrote down directions on a napkin and walked out. I left my car parked at the bottom of a long slope and walked the rest of the way because the path was too narrow for the car. It was late afternoon and I was tired. My head felt heavy, and my eyes were burning. I carried a small bag with a few clothes and some toiletries. The air was dry and still. I heard no birds, no insects, just my footsteps on the dirt path. The inn showed up behind a line of trees, a single-story building made of old wood, with a roof that looked warped in places. It had a short porch and a single door. No sign. The windows were covered with heavy shutters. I knocked on the door, and a man with a thick beard answered. He looked at me for a second, then stepped aside and let me in. He pointed to a small desk in a corner and told me to sign in if I wanted a room. His voice was flat, low, and had no warmth in it. I wrote down my name and the date. He took a key from a hook and handed it to me without saying the room number out loud. I saw a small number etched into the key. Room 3. He pointed down a hallway and told me where to go. I asked him if there were other guests. He shrugged and said no, not tonight. The entire place smelled like old wood and stale air. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I didn't see any staff besides him. I didn't ask for his name. I was too tired to talk. My room was small. A bed, a chair, a dresser, a narrow window with shutters closed tight. No decoration. I tried to open the shutters, but they were stuck. I didn't try too hard. I put my bag down and lay on the bed. The mattress was thin but firm enough. The pillow felt like a piece of folded cloth, nothing else. There was a single overhead light with a pull chain. I left it off and sat in the dark for a while, thinking I'd just sleep. But sleep never comes easy for me. After a couple of hours of lying there, I got up and walked around the room. I paced, I breathed deeply. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, trying to calm my restless mind. It was probably after midnight when I first heard something. Light footsteps, as if someone was walking on the roof. They were slow and steady. A few steps, then a pause, then a few more steps. It sounded like boots on old wood. Then I heard a quiet sound, like someone laughing through their teeth. It was muffled and barely there. I turned on the light and looked around my room. Nothing unusual. I stood on the bed and pressed my ear against the ceiling. The footsteps were faint but real. I got down, opened my door, and peeked into the hallway. It was dark and no one was there. The hallway smelled musty, like wet rags. I wanted to see if anyone else could hear it, but I didn't know where the innkeeper was. I didn't see a bell or a phone. I closed the door and tried to sleep again. The next night I stayed up late trying to see if it would happen again. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Around the same time I heard the steps again. They moved from one end of the building to the other. Then I heard that muffled laughter again, but this time it sounded like it came from the other side of my wall. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. I could hear something like breathing, slow and steady, then a quiet snicker. I banged on the wall and said, "Who's there?" I heard nothing after that. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was completely dark. I ran my hand along the wall until I found a light switch. I flicked it on. A weak yellow light filled the space. The walls were bare, just old wood planks. The floor was uneven. As I stepped further down the hall, I saw a mark on the wall. It looked like a handprint, wet and shiny. I touched it and it felt damp. It smelled like water, not sweat or anything else. It was just wet. I wiped my hand on my pants and looked back at the print, but it started to fade. I watched it disappear in front of me as if it was evaporating. I looked around, but I saw no one. There were a few doors along the hallway, all closed. I tried a few door handles, but they were locked. My heartbeat felt heavy in my chest. I didn't like this. It made no sense. I stood there for a few minutes listening. I heard nothing. I went back to my room and locked the door. I stayed awake until dawn, listening for more sounds. I couldn't relax. My throat felt dry. My legs felt weak. The next morning, I found the innkeeper by the main entrance. He was wiping the counter with a dry rag. I asked him if he heard anything at night. He shook his head. I told him I heard footsteps and laughter. He just stared at me and shrugged. I asked him about the wet handprint. He looked confused and said he didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to press him for details, but he just said the inn was old, and sometimes the wood creaked, and maybe I imagined the sounds. He didn't argue, didn't get angry, just looked bored. I felt frustrated, but I didn't want to push it. I ate some stale bread and drank some weak coffee from the kitchen area. No other guests were around. I saw no one else, just me and him. That third night, I tried to sleep early. I wanted to see if ignoring the noises would help. I lay in bed with the light off. I kept my eyes closed for a long time, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. They were faster this time, more erratic. I heard them stop right above me. I felt a kind of pressure in the air, like when someone stands close behind you. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, except for a little light under the door. I heard that muffled laughter again, this time sounding like it came from inside the wall. I got up and yanked open the door. The hallway was dark again. I turned on the light. There were 3 wet handprints this time, running along the wall, leading toward the end of the corridor. I followed them, my heart pounding. As I got closer, I heard a quiet tapping sound, like fingers against wood. The corridor turned a corner, and I saw another closed door. No number on it. The handprints were on this door, glistening. I tried the handle. It was locked. I pressed my ear against the door. I heard soft breathing inside, then a low chuckle. I backed away, feeling my stomach tighten. I didn't know what to do. I turned around and walked back to my room. The handprints disappeared again. I checked where they had been, and the wood was dry. My palms were sweating. I felt dizzy. Over the next few nights, it got worse. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard those footsteps. Sometimes I heard them running along the roof. Other times it sounded like several pairs of feet shuffling. The laughter came and went, never loud, always just a quiet snicker, as if mocking me from behind a thin wall. Sometimes I felt a presence in the room, like someone standing next to my bed, but when I turned on the light, I was alone. My nerves were shot. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My muscles ached because I was always tense. I tried asking the innkeeper again more firmly. He offered no explanation. He just said he never heard anything and that no one else had complained. He refused to open any locked doors and said they were for storage. He didn't try to calm me down. He didn't seem worried. I wondered if he was part of it somehow, but he just looked blank. No reaction. One night I decided to wait in the hallway, sitting on the floor, facing that door where I once heard breathing. I turned off the corridor light and sat in the darkness, listening. After about an hour, I heard faint footsteps again. I held my breath. I heard something moving overhead. I looked up and saw dust falling from the ceiling. Then I heard the laughter, right behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. I ran my hand along the walls and felt nothing. My heart was racing. My forehead was damp with sweat. Then I felt something wet on my hand. I pulled it back and saw a fresh handprint next to where I was sitting. It was exactly the size of my hand, only slightly elongated fingers, as if stretched. I touched it again, but it faded as before. I sat there, breathing hard, feeling a knot in my chest. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Just silence. On another night, I tried making noise. I banged on the walls, I shouted, I told whoever was there to stop messing with me. I got no response. I tried waiting with the door open, hoping to catch whoever it was. Still nothing. But as soon as I tried to rest, the footsteps and laughter came back. It felt like it was playing with me, testing how far it could push me. Every time I got up to investigate, the signs would vanish. Every time I relaxed, it came back. I started to feel a constant tension in my body. My neck was stiff. My eyes were bloodshot. I jumped at small sounds. My clothes felt damp even though the air was dry. My stomach hurt. I could barely eat. I wanted to leave, but I had nowhere else to go that night. The path back to my car was long and dark, and I didn't trust my own reactions anymore. I felt disconnected, like I was losing track of time. I didn't remember what day it was. On what I think was my last night there, I packed my things and decided I would leave at first light. I lay on the bed, wearing my boots and jacket, ready to go. I tried to stay awake all night. Around midnight, the noises started again. Footsteps on the roof, laughter behind the walls. I got up and stood by the door, hand on the knob, waiting. I could feel my heart beating so hard that my chest hurt. I slowly opened the door and stepped out. The corridor was dark. I flicked on the light. No handprints this time. Instead, I saw the door at the end of the hall was slightly open. It had never been opened before. I walked toward it, one step at a time. My legs felt weak. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. Inside was a small empty room with a wooden floor and bare walls. No furniture. The smell was stale and sour. I heard something in the corner, a faint scraping sound. I took one step inside and stopped. There was nothing visible. The scraping continued, then stopped suddenly. I felt a rush of cold air. My throat tightened. I backed out of the room and closed the door. When I looked at my hand, it was wet. I wiped it on my jacket. I could feel something watching me from behind that door, even though I saw nothing. My breath was shallow. I stepped back to my room and closed the door. I sat on the bed, my heart pounding, and waited. I waited until dawn. Once I saw a little light under the shutters, I grabbed my bag and left. The corridor was empty. The main area was empty. The innkeeper wasn't there. I left the key on the desk and walked out. The air outside felt heavy and still. I hurried down the slope to where my car was parked. My legs hurt. My head felt like it was going to split. I got in the car and drove away without looking back. I still can't explain what happened. I don't know who made those footsteps. I don't know why there were wet handprints that disappeared. I don't know who was laughing behind the walls. All I know is that I didn't sleep the whole time I was there. I felt something there, something invisible, toying with me. It never hurt me, never attacked me, never even touched me in a way I could prove, but it got inside my head and stayed there. I can't shake the feeling that it watched me the whole time, enjoying every minute of my discomfort. I can still feel that tension in my body, that dryness in my throat, that tightness in my chest. I don't think I'll ever go back. I'd rather lie awake somewhere else than stay another night in that place. I arrived before sunrise, waiting on the rocky shoreline for the tide to go down. The place was empty. There were no boats, no people, no noise. I had checked my watch a few times, trying to gauge the right moment. I stood there with my boots sinking into patches of wet sand. I was alone. I carried a small backpack with paper, pencils, a camera, and a flashlight. My clothes were simple: an old jacket, canvas pants, and a cap. I had read about this coastal town in a dusty archive. The old document said it sank after a storm, and that its ruins became visible when the water withdrew. It was rare. Not many people bothered to come out here. Most considered it a waste of time. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to walk on its streets. I wanted to note every detail. As the tide lowered, I saw broken rooftops, edges of old stone walls, and tangled debris rise from the water. The exposed structures looked unstable. I stepped forward, feeling the muddy sand pressing against my soles. I smelled stale salt and something rotten. I tried to keep my breathing steady. I moved toward what had once been the main street. The water still clung to parts of it. Each step stirred small pools. My boots kicked broken pieces of wood and something that felt like smooth stones. I bent down, picked one up, and realized it was a shard of painted pottery. It was worn. I put it in my pocket. I walked deeper into the area. The place was quiet. My own steps sounded too loud. I looked at the half-collapsed walls, the broken windows, the chunks of roof beams. I saw old doors lying flat on the sand. I tried to imagine what these buildings were used for, but I kept my thoughts straight. I did not want to distract myself. I focused on what I saw: exposed wooden frames, rusted metal hinges, and scattered bricks. Everything looked damp and slick. I smelled the algae in the wet wood. I touched a wall. The surface felt cold and gritty. I kept going. I entered what seemed to be a narrow street. I saw crabs scuttling away. I heard a trickling sound of water draining. Then I heard something else. Soft whispers. It sounded like voices, but they did not rise above a murmur. It was not normal speech. It was more like gurgling or a low hum. It was coming from somewhere ahead. I tried to focus my hearing. There were no other people around, I was sure of that. I stopped walking, listened, and felt a slight tremor in my chest. I told myself to stay calm. I switched on my flashlight even though there was still some light. The sun was low but present. The flashlight beam bounced off wet surfaces. I saw nothing moving except tiny sea creatures and a few loose strands of seaweed. I walked on, following the sound. The sand stuck to my boots and made each step feel heavy. I looked through broken windows into the interiors of old rooms. They were dark, half filled with sand and water. I saw empty shelves, pieces of old wooden chairs, and fragments of tiles scattered on the ground. I smelled something musty. In some places, the walls were tilted. I could not enter every structure because they looked too unstable. I tapped a wall with my knuckle and the sound was dull. I noted the thickness of the plaster. I took a few photographs. As I turned a corner, I heard the whispering again. It was like soft gargling, like water passing through a tight space. I looked around for a pipe or a gap where the tide water might be draining. I saw only rough walls and broken floors. I decided to move closer to a building that still had part of a door frame. I stepped inside. The interior was dim, so I pointed my flashlight around slowly. I saw a collapsed table, a broken vase, and a pile of thick rope that had turned green with slime. My foot disturbed the water on the floor. It splashed against a wooden plank. Then I heard a quiet scraping sound along a wall. It was a light scratching noise. It made my shoulders tense. I approached the wall. I held my flashlight steady. I saw a patch of peeling plaster and exposed brick. The scratching continued. It did not sound random. It came in short bursts. I leaned closer. My mouth felt dry. I breathed through my nose. I tapped the wall lightly with my flashlight. The scratching stopped. I waited. I felt my pulse in my neck. After a few seconds, the scratching started again, but now it sounded lower, near the base of the wall. I crouched down. The water soaked my pant legs. I saw a small gap between the bricks. I aimed my flashlight inside. The gap was narrow. I could not see far into it. I smelled stale air. I reached inside with 2 fingers, felt the edge of a rough brick. Nothing moved against my hand, but the scratching persisted. I decided to leave the building. I did not want to stay too long in one spot. The tide would not remain out forever, and I needed to see more of the ruins. I moved back outside onto the damp street. The whispering sound was still there, now more noticeable. It seemed to come from all around, like a faint chorus of voices trapped underwater. I turned off my flashlight, letting my eyes adjust. The morning light was getting brighter. I saw that the street led toward a larger square. The square had a cracked fountain at the center. I approached it carefully. The fountain was made of stone blocks. Its bowl was half filled with dark water. I leaned over and saw bits of seaweed drifting inside. There were no fish. I noticed that the whispering grew louder when I stood near the fountain. I backed away. The sound lowered a bit. I approached again. The sound rose. I checked around the fountain. The ground was uneven. I kicked a piece of broken tile away. I stooped down and listened. The voices, if they were voices, sounded almost like they were coming from the ground below me. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I did not know what caused these sounds. I considered the possibility of trapped air pockets under the ruins, or some kind of water flow beneath the surface. I tried not to think too much. I just noted the fact that there were strange gargling whispers here. I moved on, turning down another street. I looked inside another structure. The windows were shattered. Pieces of glass were stuck in the frames, and some lay on the wet sand. I stepped inside cautiously. The floor was slippery. I smelled something bitter. I checked a cabinet against the wall. Its doors were open, and the inside was empty. I found no objects of value. I found no personal items. I did not see any bones or remains. There were no plates, no cups, no clothing. Everything had been washed away or destroyed. I just saw fragments of building materials. I moved deeper inside that building. At the back, I found a narrow staircase leading down. It was partially clogged with sand. I shone my flashlight. The steps were covered in slime. I tried to descend a few steps, holding onto the wall. My hand touched cold stone. It felt stable enough. I went down carefully, one step at a time. The air got heavier. I felt my chest tighten. The whispering noise faded. Instead, I heard dripping water and something shifting behind the walls. I could not see what it was, but I heard a soft scraping again. It sounded closer this time. I gripped my flashlight tight. My hand felt sweaty. I tried to keep my breathing quiet. At the bottom of the stairs, I reached a small chamber. It was mostly flooded. The water reached my ankles. I moved the flashlight slowly over the room. I saw broken jars, rotted pieces of wood, and something that looked like metal hooks attached to a beam. Everything was crusted with barnacles and slime. I tried to pick up a piece of wood, but it crumbled in my hand. The scraping sound came from my left. I turned the flashlight that way. There was a hole in the wall. It was about the size of my head. The wall there looked weaker, as if something had pushed against it. I listened, holding my breath. I did not see anything inside the hole. I leaned forward, holding the flashlight closer. The beam reflected on the wet surfaces. The scraping paused. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I decided not to put my hand inside. I was not sure what was behind that wall. The air smelled stale and salty. My back felt tense. I stepped away from the hole. When I did, something tapped on the wall from inside, 3 short taps. I froze. I did not want to panic. I thought about leaving immediately. My pulse sped up. I backed toward the stairs. My boots made soft splashes. The tapping continued. I climbed the stairs, slipping a bit on the slimy steps. I held the rail and pulled myself up. I reached the top, turned, and looked one more time down the stairs. It was dark. I heard a soft scraping again, then silence. I left the building without looking back. Outside, the tide was still low, but I could sense it would turn soon. The light had changed. I walked toward the edge of the ruins, back the way I came. The whispering grew faint. I passed by a cluster of toppled walls and noticed that some windows were larger than I remembered. Perhaps I had not noticed them before. I checked inside one more structure. It had a high ceiling that was partially collapsed. Patches of sunlight entered through holes in the roof. I saw broken shelves, a few metal tools, and scattered pebbles. The floor was uneven. I smelled a mix of damp stone and dead algae. I crouched near a pile of debris and pulled out a wooden frame that might have been a picture frame. The image inside was gone. The paper had rotted away. I set it aside and checked another corner. My foot bumped a piece of metal. I picked it up. It was a rusted hinge. I turned it in my hand, flakes of rust falling off. I put it down. I heard the whispering again, but it sounded distant. I stood up and walked outside. I looked toward the shore. I could see more water creeping in. The tide was starting to return. I decided I had enough. I did not know what made those noises. I did not know what scraped the walls or tapped from the other side. I had seen no people, no bodies, nothing alive except small sea creatures. The empty windows, the broken furniture, the hollow rooms all felt heavy. I knew I should leave before the water covered everything again. The ground was still firm enough, but I did not want to wade through deeper water. I walked quickly now, trying not to slip. My boots left prints in the wet sand. I headed back toward the rocky shoreline where I had started. The sound of waves grew louder as I moved away from the center of the ruins. The whispering faded behind me. I glanced back once or twice. I saw the old walls leaning at strange angles. The light made everything look plain and colorless. I felt my calves strain as I hurried. My heartbeat was still fast. I reached the edge of the ruins and stepped onto firmer ground. I looked down at my boots. They were covered in mud and bits of seaweed. Once on the rocks, I took a few seconds to catch my breath. I listened. I could still hear the ocean, but not the whispers. I could still smell the salty air, but not the stale odors. The ruins were behind me, half buried in sand and water, with broken windows and empty doorways. They stood there, silent now. I understood that the place offered no comfort. I felt tension leaving my shoulders, but my stomach still felt tight. I walked along the shore, away from the ruins. I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The water was rising, covering the lower streets. In a few hours, the place would vanish beneath the waves. The strange sounds would be trapped underwater again. I had my notes and my photographs. I did not know if I would return. I tried to focus on the steps ahead. Each step took me farther from that heavy silence and that strange whispering. I kept walking until I could no longer see the top of the old walls. The ocean covered them, and they were gone from sight. I had spent years handling rare texts and hidden manuscripts. I had seen books with covers that felt strange to the touch, and pages so old they crumbled under a soft breath. I had learned to handle them with patience and steady hands. I had not panicked before. I had not held my breath at every tiny sound, but that was before I received that package. That was before the grimoires and the symbols that shifted when I blinked. That was before I felt something pressing against the back of my head while I stood alone in my own study, too nervous to turn around. I knew how to handle old books. I did not know how to handle this. I remember the day I got the package. It arrived in a plain cardboard box with no return address. I had agreed to look at old and unknown works before, so this was not unusual. Inside, there was a single volume wrapped in a piece of rough cloth. The cloth smelled like damp soil. I placed it on my desk and pulled the cloth back. Underneath, I found a leather-bound book. The leather looked uneven and stained. I could not see a title on the spine or the cover. I noticed small scratches on the corners of the leather, as if it had been dragged over stone. I turned on my desk lamp. I held the book and lifted the cover. The pages looked thick, probably handmade paper, yellowish and rough. The ink on the first page looked fresh, as if it had just been written. I leaned forward and squinted at the words. They did not form any language I recognized. The shapes of the letters looked sharp and thin, almost like someone had pressed a knife into the page. I ran my fingertip over the ink. It felt dry, but the black lines seemed to glisten under the light. I flipped a few pages. Each page had different symbols. Some looked cramped, filling the whole page. Others were spaced out. A few characters at the top, some in the middle, some near the bottom. I tried to see patterns. I could not. I took a pencil from the drawer and tapped the tip against my desk. I wanted to mark pages, to note something down. I always did that. But I hesitated. Something about this book felt wrong, like it was waiting for me to do something before it reacted. I heard a faint sound. It was a scraping noise. I stopped turning pages and stayed quiet. The noise came again. It seemed to come from the window on my left. I looked over. The window was closed, curtains half drawn. I stood up and walked to it. I pulled the curtains aside and looked out. It was dark outside. The lamp on my desk did not light the outside well. I pressed my ear against the glass. The scraping sound seemed to move along the frame. I lifted the latch and opened the window a crack. Cold air rushed in. I listened. Nothing. Just quiet night air. I closed the window. I turned back to the desk. The scraping started again. I stared at the closed window. The sound now came from the glass itself, as if someone or something dragged a thin nail from one corner to the other. I looked at the window frame carefully. I saw no scratches. I tapped the glass with my fingertip. The noise stopped. I waited. After a few seconds of silence, I let out a long breath. I returned to the desk and looked at the book again. The letters on the page I had left open did not look the same as before. Before, I had seen a set of sharp characters arranged in 3 neat lines. Now I saw a single curved symbol in the center of the page, ink smudged at the edges. I flipped back to the first page. The text there had changed too. Now it showed a series of looping marks, each one thicker than the last, like spirals drawn in a hurry. I leaned in. The ink looked wet now. I saw it shine. I touched the corner of the page. The tip of my finger came away with a black smear. The ink was fresh now. I felt a tightness in my chest. I did not smell anything unusual. I heard my own breathing. I decided to check the rest of the house. I stepped away from the desk, leaving the lamp on and the book open. I walked through the hallway. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. The floorboards creaked. I went into the living room. Everything seemed fine. The temperature felt normal. I returned to my study. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, I noticed the air felt colder. I could see my breath. The room smelled damp now, like the cloth that had wrapped the book. The lamp's light seemed dimmer. The shadows around the corners of the room looked darker. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end. I approached the desk. The pages of the book had changed again. Now, strange characters ran vertically down the page, and some of the ink seemed to drip onto the desk. I saw a black droplet roll onto the wooden surface. I grabbed a tissue and wiped it up. The ink stained the tissue. I threw it into the wastebasket and looked at my hand. My fingertips had dark smudges. I tried to rub them off on my pants. The black mark stayed on my skin. I reached out to close the book. As I touched the cover, I felt a slight vibration through the leather. It reminded me of something alive. A faint tremor. I pulled my hand back. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. The window scratched again. I turned and stared. The curtains were still half open. I saw nothing outside but darkness. The scratching continued. It moved in small circles at the corner of the window pane. I thought about calling someone, but it was late. I did not want to explain why I was panicking over a book. I turned back to the desk and leaned down, trying to read the characters again. They were not stable. As I watched, they shifted shape. Some faded and reappeared in other places on the page. Lines of ink stretched and curled, breaking apart and forming new patterns. It was like watching insects crawl across the page, rearranging themselves. My chest felt tight. My scalp tingled. I tried to control my breathing. I decided to close the book. I grabbed the cover with both hands and slammed it shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room. The scratching at the window stopped. I locked my eyes on the cover and waited. The cover looked normal. The leather surface looked old and stained, but it did not move. I reached for the cloth that had wrapped it. I wanted to cover the book and put it away. I would deal with it tomorrow. I picked up the cloth and placed it on top of the book. As soon as I did, I felt the cold intensify. I saw my breath in front of my face again. I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. The room smelled even stronger now, like wet dirt and mold. I looked around the study. Nothing else had changed. My bookshelf still held my usual collection. The lamp still glowed, though faintly. My desk chair sat there, but something felt off. The corners of the room seemed darker. When I tried to focus on them, I saw shapes. They were small at first, like shifting shadows. Every time I blinked, the shapes seemed closer. I looked directly at one corner. Nothing. I looked at another corner. Nothing. But in my peripheral vision, I saw movement. It was as if something stood just outside my field of vision, waiting. My legs felt weak. I pulled out my desk chair and sat down. The seat felt cold. I kept my eyes on the center of the room, trying not to look at the corners. I took a deep breath and reached for the book again. I wanted to see if closing it had fixed the problem. I peeled the cloth back. The cover looked unchanged. I opened the book slowly. The first page was completely blank now. The second page had a few symbols drawn in thick lines. I touched the page. The ink felt sticky. I pulled my finger away. The ink stretched, forming a thin thread that snapped and recoiled into the page. I stared at my fingertip. The black ink remained there, not drying, not dripping. I tried to wipe it off again. It stayed on my skin. I flipped another page. More symbols. Some looked like twisted letters. Others looked like shapes I could not place, maybe runes or marks cut by someone who did not care about meaning. The ink on these pages shifted while I looked. Lines grew longer. Symbols broke apart and formed new ones. I flipped another page. I saw a shape in the margin, a small black circle that pulsed. I slammed the book shut again. The scraping at the window started once more. I rubbed my arms. I could feel goosebumps. My heart pounded. I thought about leaving the house, but the idea of stepping outside in the dark felt worse somehow. I tried to reason with myself. It was just a book, ink and paper, maybe a trick by someone who wanted to scare me, maybe a prank. But the temperature in the room, the smell, the shifting ink, that did not feel like a trick. I rubbed my face with my hands. My skin felt clammy. My fingers were shaking. The presence in the corners of the room felt stronger. I dared to look sideways, not turning my head fully, just shifting my eyes. I caught a glimpse of a shape. It disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on it. My stomach clenched. I felt a tightness in my throat. The cold air made me shiver. I looked at the door. It was open. The hallway beyond looked normal. I decided to try something simple. I stood up, took the book under one arm, and walked out of the study. I went straight to the living room and turned on the main light. It was bright and warm. I felt a bit better. I placed the book on the coffee table and stepped back. I watched it. For a full minute, I heard nothing. The living room stayed warm. I approached the book and touched the cover. It felt normal. I opened it. The pages looked different again, but the ink did not move this time. The symbols remained still. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a trash bag, and wrapped the book in it. I sealed it tight. I placed it on a shelf. I waited. Nothing happened at first. Then I heard a faint scraping noise. It came from the direction of the study. I left the living room lights on and went back to the study. The lamp was still on. The room felt cold again. I looked around. The window was closed. No scratches visible. The corners still looked darker than they should. The presence was still there. I felt the back of my neck prickle. It was as if the book had filled this space with something, and it stayed even when I moved the book elsewhere. I returned to the living room to check the trash bag. It looked normal. I touched it. The book inside felt warm, which made no sense. I pulled it out and opened it again. This time the ink formed a large symbol across 2 pages. The symbol looked like an eye, a rough oval shape with a spot in the center. It did not move. I leaned in. The ink still smelled like soil. I closed the book. I could not stop thinking about the scratching noises, the cold air, the shapes in the corners. I could not pretend nothing happened. I decided to lock the book in my safe. I had a small safe behind a painting in the hallway. I entered the code, opened it, and placed the book inside. I shut the safe door and spun the lock. I listened. No sounds. I turned off the lights in the living room and walked back to the study. The room felt cold again, but I tried to ignore it. I left the lamp on and checked the window. The glass was intact. No marks. I checked the walls, the corners, the floor. Everything looked normal. Yet I felt watched. I felt pressure on my temples. I stood still in the center of the room and listened to my own breathing. My breath sounded shallow and fast. My heart beat hard in my chest. I turned my head slowly, scanning the corners. Each time, I saw nothing. But I could not shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight. I closed the door to the study. I tried to leave whatever presence was there behind that door. I went back to the living room. I turned on every light I could. I paced around for a few minutes. Nothing happened. The temperature felt normal here. No strange smells. No sounds. I walked to the hallway and looked at the painting covering the safe. Everything was quiet. I touched my forehead. I was sweating. I wiped my hands on my pants again and checked my fingertips. The black ink stain was still there, darker than before. I ran warm water in the kitchen sink and scrubbed my fingertips with soap. The black stain faded a little, but I could still see it. I tried again. It would not come off completely. I leaned against the counter, breathing hard, trying to calm down. I reminded myself that no one had died. Nothing had attacked me. But I could not deny what I felt. The sense that the book was not just paper and ink. The sense that it wanted me to see something. The presence in the study. The scratching at the window. I stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The normal sound helped. I thought about calling a friend or a colleague, but it was late. I felt stupid. Who would believe me if I said the ink was moving on its own? I decided to wait until morning. Maybe sunlight would help. Maybe I could take the book to someone else. Maybe I could leave it somewhere and let someone else handle it. I felt ashamed of that thought. but I also felt scared. I headed back to the living room and sat down on the couch. I turned on the TV with low volume, trying to have some background noise. I kept glancing at the hallway, thinking about the safe and the book inside. I tried to focus on the TV, but my attention drifted. I rubbed my arms, still feeling the cold air that had surrounded me in the study. I could not forget the ink changing shape, the feeling that the book was alive, the scraping at the window. I stayed there, awake, alert, until the early hours. Every small sound made me jump. The fear did not go away. I could still feel something waiting, not in the room, but at the edges of my thoughts. I knew I would have to deal with the book again tomorrow. I did not know what it wanted. I did not know what would happen when I opened it again. I only knew I was afraid to try. I stopped at the old train station because I had nowhere else to go. I had been walking for hours and my legs were aching. The place looked abandoned. The paint on the walls was flaking. The wooden boards felt weak under my boots. There was a strange odor in the air, maybe old oil or damp wood. I saw a few old benches and some broken crates stacked in a corner. There were no signs of life. I wanted to rest. I figured I could spend the night there and move on in the morning. There was no one around to tell me otherwise. I remember standing near the entrance holding my small pack against my side. The night air had a sting to it. I tried to settle in. I took slow steps around, checking for anything dangerous. There were no lights except a few oil lamps hanging from rusty hooks on the walls. They were weak and their flames flickered for no reason. The glass covers around them were dirty. I saw a lot of dust in the corners. The door was half off its hinges. The floor groaned as I moved. I had not planned to stay inside. I thought about sleeping outside under the stars, but the wind picked up as soon as I arrived. It made sense to step inside for shelter. The station's interior was small. There was a single waiting area, and beyond it what looked like an old ticket booth with its window shattered. There was a corridor leading to a storage room, but I did not feel comfortable going deeper. I decided to drop my pack on a bench near the back wall. I unrolled a thin blanket and checked my water. I had enough for the night. I could move on at first light. I tried to relax. My shoulders were tense. My breath felt shallow. The wind outside kept blowing through the gaps in the walls. It made the boards creak. The place felt unstable, but I had no other options. I sat down, rubbed my neck, and tried to ignore my discomfort. I took a sip of water and leaned back. The oil lamps gave off a weak light that didn't reach the edges of the room. I tried to focus on the wooden boards and the cracked plaster. I stared at them, forcing my mind to calm down. My heart was still beating a bit fast from the day's long walk. Then I heard something that should not have been there. It sounded like a whistle. It was distant and weak, but it had a clear, sharp tone. It reminded me of a train's whistle, but I knew this place was abandoned. I had not seen any tracks in use for a long time. I stiffened, stood up, and listened. The night air pressed against the broken walls. I walked to what was left of a window and looked out. The rails were still there, but covered in rust. There were weeds growing around the ties. I didn't see anyone. I didn't see any lights. I just heard that whistle again, a little softer this time. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe the wind passed through some broken pipes or something. I listened carefully. The whistle faded. I waited for several minutes, leaning forward, my hand resting on the window frame. The wood felt rough. My fingertips pressed against splinters. I tried not to think about it too hard. There were no trains around. There hadn't been any here for decades, from what I could guess. I stepped back and looked at the lamps. They were steady enough now, not flickering. I decided to ignore the whistle and get some sleep. I sat down again, pulled the blanket over my shoulders, and closed my eyes. I listened to my breathing, tried to settle my nerves. Then I heard footsteps on the wooden floor outside the waiting area. I opened my eyes and stood up again. My legs felt tense. I walked towards the door and looked around. I saw nothing but empty benches and broken furniture. I walked back, and as I was about to sit down, I heard another sound. It was like something running along the rails, but not metal on metal. It was just a faint rustling sound. I stepped outside, stood near the platform, and looked at the tracks. The moonlight was weak, but I could see well enough. The rails were empty. There was nothing moving. I ran my hand over my face. I felt sweat. My forehead was damp, even in the cool air. I kept hearing faint whispers. They were too low to make out words. They seemed to come from all sides, but I could not pinpoint a source. I turned in slow circles, expecting to see an animal or a person. Nothing. The station was silent except for the wind and that strange whistle that came and went. I decided to try and sleep anyway. I had to move on in the morning. I sat down, breathing slowly, and stared at the floor. Then I heard my name. It was a whisper. Thomas. It was my name, spoken by a voice I didn't recognize. I jumped to my feet. My heart pounded. I looked around, wide-eyed. "Who's there?" I said out loud. My own voice echoed dully. No answer. I felt my stomach tighten. There was a sour taste in my mouth. I took a few steps toward the ticket booth. Broken glass crunched under my boots. I pushed the wooden door open and looked inside. It was empty. I passed my hand along the counter. It felt dusty. I reached up and turned the oil lamp so it would cast more light. The flame shook a bit. I saw a few old tickets scattered on the floor. They looked brittle. I stepped back out and heard something else. It was not just one voice now. There were multiple voices, all whispering my name. "Thomas, come," they said. The whispers were soft, but urgent. They repeated my name and something else I could not fully catch. It sounded like they wanted me to follow them. I froze. My neck felt stiff. My chest felt heavy. The whispering made no sense. There was no one there. I tried to push it aside, tried to ignore it, but the whispering got louder. I heard shuffling. It sounded like footsteps brushing against the floor, but I saw nothing. I tried to steady my breathing. My mouth felt dry. I whispered to myself that it was just the wind, but I knew the difference. The voices were calling me by name. The wind could not do that. I moved toward the door leading outside to the old platform. I stepped onto the old boards. They creaked under my weight. I looked at the tracks again. My eyes were adjusting to the dark. I could make out the line of metal stretching into the distance. I saw something then. It looked like silhouettes standing near the rails. They were faint outlines of people, standing still, facing me. I stared at them, blinking hard. They were there one moment and then they moved. They ran along the tracks, passing from one side to the other, vanishing behind old pillars and crates. I tried to follow them with my eyes, but they were too fast. They made no sound except a faint shuffling. I felt a chill down my spine. I stepped back into the station. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall and tried to calm myself. I thought about leaving right then, but I was tired. I also worried that if I left, I would have to walk through the dark fields alone. I decided to wait it out. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I rubbed my eyes and drank some more water. I sat down, but I kept looking around, trying to catch any movement. The lamps flickered again. The flame in the nearest lamp grew dim, then brightened for no reason. I smelled something strange, like old coal dust. The voices came back. They whispered from the corners of the room. "Thomas, please come. Thomas, it's time." They said these words again and again. I clenched my jaw. I stood up. My back was tense. I moved toward the door. I wanted to leave the building, maybe hide outside. As I reached the doorframe, I felt a push of cold air. It hit my face and made me gasp. The cold made my teeth chatter. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I tried to say something, but my throat felt tight. The voices got louder. They were all around me, whispering at once. I walked outside onto the empty platform. I saw the silhouettes again running along the tracks, but there was no sound of breathing, no sound of shoes on gravel. They were just shapes moving in the dark. The moonlight hit the rails, showing how rusted they were. The silhouettes did not seem to care. They passed over the rails easily. I called out, "Who are you?" My voice cracked. I heard no answer. Instead, I heard the whistle again, clear this time. It rose in pitch, then faded slowly. Then I heard the voices say something else. "All aboard." They said it quietly, but the words were clear. They repeated it. "All aboard, Thomas. All aboard." My heart hammered. They wanted me to board something. I saw no train, no lights, nothing but empty tracks and weeds. Still, they kept saying it. I felt my legs tremble. I backed away from the platform's edge. I stepped inside the station, grabbed my pack, and slung it over my shoulder. I wanted to be ready to leave if I had to. I stood in the middle of the room, holding my pack with one hand, clenching it hard. I looked at the shadows on the walls. They shifted, even though the lamplight barely moved. I considered just running off into the fields, but the night was dark and I was tired. I hoped that if I ignored these voices, they would go away. I tried to think of something calm. I tried to slow my breathing. My heart was still pounding in my ears. My shoulders felt tight. The voices spoke again. "Thomas, the train is here." I heard a faint clank as if metal touched metal. I walked slowly to the door and looked outside. The tracks were empty. There was no train. I saw a faint outline of something darker than the night, as if a shape stood over the rails. It was like a large object blocking the faint starlight. I felt my pulse race. I could hear soft murmurs, as if passengers were talking in low tones. There was a faint smell of old seats, as if leather and dust mixed together. I could almost feel warm air on my face, but I saw no source for it. I backed away. The station walls felt too close. I felt trapped. The voices kept calling my name, telling me to hurry. I could not see them, but I heard their urgent tone. My mouth was dry. I tried to swallow. My arms felt heavy. I gripped the strap of my pack, looking for something solid to hold on to. I turned and looked at the benches. Nothing moved inside the station except me. The voices were coming from outside, but also inside my head. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I walked along the wall, feeling the rough wood under my fingertips. I reached a window and looked out. I expected to see fields and trees, maybe the faint outline of a distant farmhouse. Instead, I saw those silhouettes moving across the tracks. They were not solid. They flickered in and out of sight. They raised their arms as if waving for me to come closer. I clenched my teeth and stepped back. My eyes were watering. I wiped them with the back of my hand. The whispering rose in volume. The words blended together into a kind of pleading sound. I could not make out specific words anymore, just the sense that they wanted me to do something. The whistle sounded again, and I felt a vibration under my feet, a subtle shaking that made the boards creak. I looked down. The floor looked stable enough, but I felt a slight tremor. I stepped outside onto the platform. The tremor felt stronger there. It reminded me of how the ground shakes when a heavy vehicle passes by, but there was nothing there. I felt dizzy. I gripped a post and looked around, breathing through my mouth. The air smelled stale. The silhouettes were gone now, and I saw nothing but empty tracks. I tried to calm myself by counting my breaths. The tremor faded. The whispering faded too, but I could still sense them nearby. I stayed outside for a while, looking at the sky. The stars were faint. The moon was low. I judged that morning was a few hours away. I decided I would wait until the first light and then leave. I didn't care if I was tired. I just wanted to put distance between me and this place. I returned inside and sat on the bench. I kept my pack at my feet. I tried to rest my head against the wall, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard them whisper my name. Every time I looked around, I saw nothing but old wood, dusty corners, and broken furniture. The lamps flickered sometimes, but that was it. I tapped my foot on the floor, trying to stay awake. My throat felt sore. I drank some water. I stared at the door, expecting to see something appear at any moment. Nothing did. At one point, I stepped outside again, just to check the sky. I felt colder now. The wind had settled down. The silhouettes did not appear. I heard no whispering. I stood there for a while, silent, just listening. The air was still. The tracks looked empty. I heard no whistle, no voices, no strange sounds. Everything seemed normal now, as if the place had decided to leave me alone. I waited, tense, for hours. Eventually, I saw the sky lighten. The boards were visible without the lamp's light. I watched as the first rays of dawn touched the rails. Nothing moved. I rolled up my blanket, took a last sip of water, and stepped outside. My legs were stiff. My back hurt. I walked down the platform and followed the track a short distance. I looked back at the station. It was quiet and empty. The windows were broken, the wood was old, and I saw no signs that anyone had been there. I moved on, heading away from the place, not looking back again. As I put distance between me and that station, I kept thinking about the voices and the silhouettes. I had no explanation for it. I just knew I was never going back there. I felt tense and tired. My shoulders hurt. I walked fast, wanting to reach a road or a town. I wanted to be around people, to hear normal sounds, to see normal faces. The memory of those whispers and that strange whistle stayed with me for a long time, but I did not stop until I was far from that old station. I live in a small apartment on the top floor of an old building. The walls are thin, the floors creak, and the pipes make noises late at night. I never paid much attention to these things, but about a week ago, something started happening that I cannot ignore. The door of my living room closet began to open on its own in the middle of the night. I tried to convince myself it was a draft or a loose hinge, but now I am not so sure. Something inside the closet seems to watch me while I sleep. It does not attack me. It does not come out. It just stays there, hidden behind my old shirts and jackets, whispering. I can hear it in the darkness, and I can smell something like old, dead flowers. It makes my head pound, and I cannot rest. I feel it changing me, or maybe I am losing my mind. But I need to understand it. I need to know what is in there. I woke up 3 nights ago at around 3 in the morning. My eyes were heavy, and my neck felt stiff. I rolled over and saw the outline of the closet door. I usually keep it closed, and I remember closing it that night before going to bed. But it was open. The door was slightly ajar, maybe a few inches. I stared at it for a few seconds, and I felt my breathing slow. There was a strange smell. It was like something wet and old, like flowers that have been left out too long. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. The door did not move, but it was not closed. I tried to remember if I had left it open. I was sure I had not. I stood up and walked over to it. I pushed it shut, and I made sure it clicked into the frame. Then I stood there in my underwear, looking at the blank surface of the door, feeling the cool floor under my feet. I listened for any sound. The building was quiet. I went back to bed. The next morning, I checked the hinges and the latch. Everything seemed fine. The door did not swing freely. If I opened it halfway, it stayed there. If I closed it, it stayed closed. There was no reason for it to open on its own. I tried not to think about it. I had to get ready for work. That night, I went to bed around midnight. I turned off all the lights, locked the front door, and checked the closet one more time. It was closed. I lay in bed and listened to the faint noises of the building. At some point, I fell asleep. I do not know how long I slept, but I remember waking up in the dark. I stared at the ceiling. I felt a pressure in my chest, like something heavy on me. I turned my head and looked at the closet door. It was open again. This time it was open wider than before. I could see my jackets hanging inside. They did not move, but I could see the dark space beyond them. I sat up and felt sweat on my neck. I felt a slight headache. I took a deep breath and got out of bed. I approached the closet slowly. I heard something. It was very faint, like a voice speaking from far away. I could not understand the words. It was not clear language, just a soft whisper. I leaned in. The smell of old flowers was stronger this time. I reached out and touched my coats, pushing them aside, trying to see the back of the closet. Nothing was there, just the old wooden back panel, some boxes on the floor. No person, no animal, nothing visible. I did not sleep well that night. I kept the closet door closed and tried to ignore everything. But as soon as I lay down, I felt like something was behind that door, just waiting for me to drift off. I turned on the bedside lamp and stayed awake until dawn. The next day, I decided to do something about it. I brought home a small chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the closet doorknob. I checked it from different angles. If the door tried to open, it would hit the chair. I went to bed feeling a little more in control, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to a scraping sound. I looked over and saw the door open again, just a bit. The chair had been pushed aside somehow. It was still under the knob, but angled weirdly, like someone had twisted it. The door was open about an inch. I got up, grabbed the chair, and slammed the door shut. I pushed the chair back into place. I checked the latch and tried to pull the door open without turning the knob. It would not budge. There was no reason for it to open by itself. I barely slept that night. My head hurt, my legs felt shaky. I got up and made coffee at 5 in the morning. The apartment felt heavier. There was no actual weight, but I felt pressure in my ears. I looked around the living room. Everything looked normal. The closet door was closed. The floor was clean. The sofa and TV were where they should be. The smell was gone, but I could not forget the sound of that whisper. It was not loud or angry, just constant, like someone talking behind thick walls. I decided to try something else. That evening, I took out all my clothes from the closet and placed them on the sofa. I emptied the closet completely, leaving only the bare interior. There were 2 old boxes on the floor with some papers and junk inside, but I took them out too. The closet was empty. I inspected it carefully. The back panel looked solid. There were no holes. The sides were old wood, scratched and dry. The floor was dusty, but nothing unusual. No mold, no insects, nothing that could explain the smell or the whisper. I left it empty and closed the door. I turned off the living room light and went to bed. That night, I woke up again. The air felt too warm. I got up and walked to the living room. The closet door was open. There were no clothes inside, nothing to hide behind. Still, I smelled the old flowers. I leaned in and listened. I heard the whisper again. I could not tell if it was one voice or several. It sounded like a conversation, but I could not make out any words. It was like a low, muffled breathing combined with occasional clicks and pops. I felt my heart beating harder. I looked around the empty closet. I reached inside and touched the back wall. It felt cold. I tapped on it, solid. I looked at the edges where the wall met the sides. Nothing there. I left the door open and stood back, watching. Nothing moved. I waited a few minutes, feeling silly, feeling angry. I slammed the door shut again. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I needed sleep, but I could not relax. The next day, I was tired at work. I kept thinking about the closet. I avoided telling anyone. I just wanted to fix it. That evening, I bought a heavier chair, one with a higher back. I jammed it under the doorknob even tighter than before. I taped the knob with duct tape to the frame, wrapping it around a few times. I wanted to make sure the door stayed shut. I turned off all the lights and waited in the dark for a few minutes before going to bed. I tried to calm down, but I felt my chest tighten. I checked the door one last time before going to sleep. It was secure. I woke up suddenly, my ears ringing. I opened my eyes and saw that the lamp beside my bed was flickering. I heard a creak. I got up and rushed to the living room. The chair was still in place, but the doorknob was turning slowly against the tape. The tape stretched and made a soft tearing sound. I stood there, my mouth dry, my heart pounding. I grabbed the doorknob and held it still. It tried to move again, a gentle push from inside, then it stopped. After a minute, I slowly peeled the tape back. I opened the door. It swung open without resistance. The closet was empty. The smell was strong this time. The whisper was louder, but still not clear. I said something out loud. I think I said, "Who's there?" But there was no answer. The whisper did not stop. It just kept going at the same tone. I reached inside and pushed on the back wall again, checking every inch with my fingers, but found nothing. I closed the door and backed away. I sat on the sofa and stared at the door for a long time. Eventually, I got up and pushed the sofa against it. The sofa was heavy. I made sure the closet was completely blocked. Then I turned on all the lights in the apartment. I sat at the kitchen table and waited until morning. I did not sleep. In the morning, the sofa was still there, and the closet door was closed behind it. I pushed the sofa aside and checked again. When I opened the door, I smelled old flowers. There was no sound this time. I left it open all day while I was at home, just looking at it from time to time. Nothing happened. It seemed normal. But at night, when I turned off the lights and tried to sleep, I heard the door creak open again. I got up and saw it halfway open. I shone a flashlight inside. Nothing there. I closed it again. I went back to bed. A few hours later, I heard the whisper. I got up and the door was open again. I started feeling tension in my chest and neck. I could feel sweat on my hands. My stomach felt tight. Each night, the door opened on its own, always slowly, never fast or violent. Each night I smelled those old flowers. Some nights the whisper was soft. Other nights it was louder. It never formed words I could understand. It never made a clear demand. But it was always there, waiting, observing me, just beyond my reach. I tried to record it with my phone. One night I set my phone on a chair in front of the closet, door closed, lights off. I waited in the bedroom, listening. After a few hours, I heard the door open. I stayed in bed, pretending to sleep. The next morning, I checked the recording. I heard the hinge creak. I heard a soft rustling sound. I heard a faint whisper, but it sounded like static. I could not separate the whisper from the background noise. No clear evidence. I tried keeping the closet empty. I tried putting my clothes back inside. I tried placing a towel under the door to block it. None of it worked. The door always found a way to open. The whisper and the smell always returned. After a few days of this, I started feeling strange in my head. My sleep was broken, my appetite got worse. I kept looking at the closet during the day, touching its surface, checking the hinges, testing the latch. Everything was normal. There was no logical reason for this, but I could not deny what I saw and heard. I stopped using the living room in the evenings. I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked, headphones on, music playing. But even then, I imagined I could hear that whisper through the walls. I tried talking to it a few times, asking it what it wanted. It never answered. It just kept whispering. Sometimes it paused for a few seconds, then started again. The smell of old flowers never went away. It was always faint, clinging to the air. I tried spraying air freshener, but after a while, that old smell returned. After another week, I decided to ignore it. I told myself it could not hurt me. It never did anything harmful. It never touched me or caused physical damage except for opening that door. The presence stayed inside, watching me from behind the darkness, whispering. I tried to accept it. I tried to sleep without worrying, but I could not forget it was there, night after night studying me. Now I stand in front of the closet again. It is late. I smell the old flowers. I hear the whisper. I see my clothes hanging inside. They look normal, but the space behind them seems deeper at night, as if the closet extends into darkness that I cannot see. When I shine a light inside, I see only the back panel. When I reach in, I feel nothing unusual, but when the light is off and I am in bed, I know it is there. I know something is there, watching. I do not know who or what it is. I do not know where it came from. I have tried to understand it, but it does not respond. It just watches and whispers. It does not attack. It does not leave any marks. It just opens the door each night, enough for me to notice. enough to remind me that I am not alone here. I feel my chest tighten and my head ache. I rub my eyes and blink. The whisper gets quieter. I close the door again firmly and walk back to my bedroom. I think about moving out, but I know I cannot leave right now. I have a lease. I have my job nearby. I have no reason to explain this to anyone. I lie down and close my eyes. I hear the door creak open again in the darkness. I feel my heart beat faster and I grip the sheets with my hands. I smell old flowers. The whisper returns, steady and calm. I stay still, eyes open, staring at the darkness in my bedroom. My head hurts. My neck feels stiff. My mouth is dry. I know the closet door is open. I know it is there, and I know I cannot stop it. I can only wait and listen. It does nothing but watch me. It does nothing but whisper. It will not leave, and I cannot make it leave. I breathe slowly and stare at the ceiling, waiting for morning.